like to do is welcome tonight Anthony Trovato. He has a myriad of degrees, both bachelor's and master's in nutrition, looks like. Also, very typical of our community, many different avenues he's explored in terms of the body. I see some education there as well. And he does recommend the ketogenic diet as a part of his practice. And so he was recommended to us as a very good speaker. He's been here before talking about biological dentistry. It was amazing.
Thank you.
And so we are very fortunate to have him here with us tonight to talk about ketogenic diet. What it is, what we think it is, what it's not. I'm sure people come to you with all sorts of ideas. There's many books. They don't all say the same thing.
Right.
So tough job. It's all about you from here on out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Welcome.
So, real quick show of hands. Was anyone here last time when Dr. Connor did the whole fasting talk?
Yes.
A couple of people. Okay, so a bunch, yeah. So this was actually supposed to be with him. At least that was his original idea. He contacted me months ago and said that we were going to do this really nice joint talk on intermittent fasting and the ketogenic diet, just because it does pair so well together. Different modalities, but the end result is kind of the same. And we both started working on our individual PowerPoints and then quickly realized it was just way too much to cram in the one night. And so we split it. So he went first, and then I'm going to try to tie back into his talk a couple times because it does kind of overlap, and it is really nice to see that tie back in. But tonight, we're going to do a little bit of background on nutrition. I was mentioning that earlier on just a general way to think about food, because the keto diet is not the only way to eat, obviously, and there's no one way that is more right than others. But we'll talk about that. So what is the ketogenic diet, and then how would you go about building that? And I believe you were asking that, how you get those different numbers and how you go about building that, and then how to kind of track that and maintain that. And then we're going to do benefits of ketosis. I was told very specifically to do a lot of them and not just weight loss. So that'll be mentioned, but there are a lot more benefits than just weight loss. And I kind of built this whole talk around that and expanded around it, because John said very specifically not just to talk about weight loss, Dr. Connor. And then some ketogenic mistakes, because a lot of things you read in books and on the internet just kind of give you a blanket statement of what it is and how to do it with no real guidance. And then there are a couple things that you can do pretty drastically wrong that would either be detrimental to health, or at least you wouldn't see any real cool benefits from it. So this is the background, and we talk about this with pretty much every client that comes in. All nutrition basically boils down to the same few principles, no matter what it is. So people say, like, I follow this diet, what do you think about that diet? Probably they're all great, and if you think about it, there are a ton of them. This is just a very short list. But everyone at some point usually has tried at least one of these things. And it just kind of goes through cycles, which one's popular, which one's getting talked about in the media, etc. But when you really boil down to it and you look at kind of the foundation of all of these things, the only thing they've all done differently was they all kind of harped on a different aspect or slightly altered the kind of macronutrient distribution. Because if they didn't, and they were all exactly the same, then they would have nothing unique and nothing to sell, and they couldn't make any money. So that's my opinion on why they're all slightly different. But they all kind of come from the foundation of avoiding sugar overall and kind of decreasing processed foods. I've actually been to seminars before where they go through like 3 days of all these different cool techniques, and then they admit to the very end that all of that is just to support the body and to support the person while you work on them decreasing sugar overall, and then the health benefits kind of follow from there, which I kind of thought was profound for someone to actually admit that. And then you include some variety of vegetables, fats, and protein. And again, they argue on the rates of each one of those, but to some degree, you're going to have all of those in there. And so this is how we approach it, because I like to think of it as a game, because to some extent, everyone's going to have kind of an upper limit of how many calories they're allowed to consume throughout the day. It's not 100% set, but someone that is like 6'2", I could eat about 2,000 calories a day, and someone's only 5'2", they don't need that many calories. So the whole calorie is a calorie thing has some truth to it. It's not an exact science. We're not robots, we're not machines. So if I eat 2,001 calories, I'm not gonna gain weight overnight. But again, there's an upper limit that we're gonna try to stay within. And then with that, people say all the time, like, what if I'm just eating avocados? Well, if you have 100 a day, that adds up very quickly and you're gonna put on weight even if it's healthy food. So the real goal is, we're going to try to get in as many nutrients as possible, but while staying under that threshold of the total amount of calories. So if you eat really non-nutrient dense foods and lots of calories, you don't get a lot of nutrients in because you very quickly hit that upper limit. For example, you can have a lot of vegetables. They're going to have a ton of nutrients, minerals, vitamins, stuff like that for relatively little calories. You can have a donut that's not going to have very many nutrients at all and a ton of calories, and it's not just donuts, processed foods, stuff like that. We'll cover that in a little bit, but you can see the game you want to play here. You want to make sure you're getting in as many nutrient-dense foods as possible. And why is that really? Why do all of these diets work on decreasing sugar and processed foods? And this kind of goes back to biology, chemistry, nutrition 101, so to speak. When we eat carbohydrates, they all eventually will break down into sugar. You've probably all seen the glycemic scale. There's a rate at some do it much quicker than others, but when we eat that, the body recognizes that, the glucose gets released into our bloodstream, and as a result, our body releases insulin because it has to get rid of that glucose. Basically brings it into the cell. That's how we make energy and stuff like that. So what's the problem? Problem is we just eat way too much of that. So when we overconsume sugar, that little nice process there of just bringing it into the cells, we use it as energy, we rinse and repeat, doesn't work so well because when you have all of that coming in, the overconsumption of sugar leads to very high levels of sugar or glucose in the bloodstream. It spikes. And the problem is that if it spikes, the body is also going to spike its response, its insulin response, because it has to get all of that out of there. You don't want that circulating glucose. So you end up with something like that on the bottom there, where you're going to have a drastic rise in glucose, a drastic rise in insulin as a response. And then because of that drastic rise in insulin, you'll get the opposite effect where you're going to have a drastic crash as well, which is one problem in and of itself because you will get that like blood pressure crash. Some people get moody and irritable and tired and stuff like that. And then they say they need to eat more sugar to balance themselves out, and you get stuck in that yo-yo pattern. The other thing though is unless you're actively needing or requiring more energy, there's no reason for your cells to use all of that energy that they just sucked in there, and the excess is basically stored as fat. That's kind of the basic principles is how we get that excess storage, because if you don't need it, it doesn't just disappear, it gets stored as later. And that's mostly sugar's doing because of the insulin response. Now you can overeat anything, but the whole myth of like dietary fat equals body fat, it's just not true. It's mostly the sugar doing that. This is talking about if you just let that go long enough, that repeated, almost like knocking of the door of that insulin, trying to get into the cell basically gets tired, it gets worn out, and those insulin receptors just get lazy, for lack of a better word. They don't work as well, and there's a little cycle down there, but it leads to insulin resistance and eventually diabetes and stuff like that, where you just don't have that same sensitivity pathway that should work or function in a normal person. And here is kind of the trick, because most people just keep using sugar in that exact way. You eat it, brings it in, you get energy. But the other thing we can use as a fuel is fat. And those are really your only two options. Now you can go different directions, but those are the two that the body prefers to eat. And the problem for most people is our bodies are incredibly efficient. And if you wanted to, you could call them lazy, but they're always going to take the path of least resistance. So if you continually give them sugar, even though gram for gram fat will produce more calories than sugar will, it's just slightly easier for the body to break that sugar down. And again, path of least resistance. If it's presented with both options, or it says even worse, if you just give it sugar over and over again, the body will always choose sugar as its fuel source because there's no reason for it to work harder and there's no reason for it to burn fat, whether it's the fat you eat or we're talking about stored body fat, which is what most people are concerned about. And we basically slowly lose the ability to burn that fat for fuel. And this is getting into a long lifetime of eating this way. So when people later in life decide to say, I'm going to go on a diet, even if they do really well with their diet and they're cutting back calories and everything like that, they still might not be able to lose that fat. And there's a myriad of different reasons, toxin storage and stuff like that. But a lot of the time, it's just because your body doesn't want to burn that. And you have to be just a little bit more strict to kind of force it back into the right direction. Fat is technically the preferred fuel source of your body. It burns a lot cleaner. It produces more energy. It's just easier to use sugar, and that's why it goes for it. This is just showing that if you did eat 1 gram of sugar, you get somewhere between 30 and 38 energy molecules, ATP, which is a decent number. But if we eat fat, it actually depends upon how long that fat is. So this is coconut. It's a cool little picture I found there, but everyone knows the medium chain triglycerides. You put it in coffee, stuff like that, caprylic and capric acid. But if we just take one of the long chain fatty acids, the C16, 16 carbons, palmitic acid is its name, most common one, that's why I took it. But if you look at the picture of it, every one of those little squiggly lines is technically broken down by the body and used as energy. So the longer the fat, basically the more energy it produces. And if you run the math, 106 ATP versus 1 gram of sugar, which is kind of cool. And then of course you can't just eat 1 molecule of that. So it does add up to a lot of different energy. It's just that the body doesn't want to do it. It's much better at churning out 30 ATP over and over and over again at the expense of not really working well in the long run. Fun matrix reference. So we really have a choice when we're approaching nutrition. You can either continue to feed your body sugar or try to get away from it at least for a little bit so it can relearn how to take the other red pill there, kind of go down that rabbit hole, so to speak. And that's exactly what the ketogenic diet does. It's basically restricting carbohydrates for the goal or the purpose of having the body burn fat for fuel. And again, going back to fasting, you're not really restricting carbohydrates per se, but you're restricting the eating window. So you're only eating in a certain amount, and it results in basically the same metabolic benefits where that window where you're not eating, you'll produce these ketones because there's no sugar for your body to function on. And we go back to a fat burning machine, which is kind of what we want. So this is kind of the background of nutrition, how we approach it all together. Getting into the ketogenic diet, it is technically high fat, moderate protein, low carbs. That's kind of what you hear over and over again. Before that was kind of coined, they ran with this for a while, low carbs, high fat. They just didn't really harp on the protein, but same concept. But you can still see books written on that, the LCHF diet. But again, they want to market that versus the keto diet, so they got to call it something different. And we were talking about this earlier, but we're going to run with this real quick, and then I'm going to shift into a more easy way to apply it to everyday life. Because if you look up all the research, a true or technical ketogenic diet is extremely high in fat overall, like 80% of your diet. It says moderate, but in my opinion, it would be kind of low in protein overall, and then very, very low, if any, carbohydrates. And they're doing a lot of this research with mice and stuff like that. Humans do it, but I would find that the only reason why you would need to absolutely go into that strict of a way of eating would be for a very specific reason, like cancer treatment or something like that. Normal weight loss or any kind of the benefits I'm going to talk about later, it doesn't need to be that exact or that strict. But again, all of that is doing is it's just redistributing the macronutrients to decrease the sugar and force the body to have no other option except to burn that fat to get that energy. And so this is, again, tying into Dr. Connor's talk here, but the ketogenic diet is basically mimicking the effect of starvation. And when you look through calorie deprivation, you have to produce these ketones out of a necessity so your body can keep going. And we're not doing it through the starvation of calories, which is kind of the key here. You're just doing it through the reduction of carbohydrates, and we're kind of mimicking fasting. And Dr. Connor talked about this. The only single factor in between pretty much all longevity studies is the fact that they just ate less. It was just simple caloric restriction, which again, easier said than done. So we're not doing it by restricting calories or diet. We are doing it just simply through restricting carbohydrates. And then you can also pair it with the fasting, which is shrinking the window of eating a little bit. But when we don't eat, pretend we're doing that starvation thing, ketosis is a very natural process the body goes through. It's the way that we're able to maintain energy levels when your kind of food intake or calorie intake is low. Your fat, hopefully your body fat long term, is breaking down through, it's called beta oxidation, but these ketones are produced, and the ketones are what technically are used for the energy. There's 3 of them. The first one that's produced is this acetoacetate here, and we were talking a little bit earlier. You can measure every one of these, but the first one over here on the left, that is what is produced first. It's converted to the main one. That's kind of the one that circulates around your blood. It's what you use for energy. It's called BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate. And then the last one is actually a byproduct. You don't really use it per se, but you can track it because you breathe it out when you're really heavily in ketosis. They call it keto breath or dragon breath, but same acetone you would use to clean, chemistry where you just produce it. And you can track it through a bunch of things. So the first one is actually a urine test, and I don't know a lot about that because I've never done it. You said that you do it, and that is kind of like a yes/no. I know most of them give you a gradient of purple colors as you pee on it, and it's just like, are you in ketosis or are you not? It's fun to do. It's just not going to give you a depth or a range of how far in are you, but it's nice to know if you're in or out depending upon like what you ate the night before. It's fun to track that way. The middle one is probably the most accurate one because you actually get a digitalized reader. There's a bunch of them out there. This one's called Keto Mojo. I like this one specifically because it's the same port and you can actually put glucose strips and ketone strips into the same machine and you don't have to buy two machines. We were talking earlier, the strips are kind of expensive. I think the glucose strips are about 50 cents a piece and the ketone strips are $1, so not terrible if you're doing it every once in a while, but it adds up very quickly if you're doing it all the time. I don't know if everyone has one, you have one. Basically between 0 and 0.5, you're not in ketosis, it's lower. Very little, yeah, and you're not in ketosis at all. If you bump it up somewhere between 5 and 0.1, you're kind of getting there. You're starting your way into ketosis, and they say somewhere between 1 and 2 is that sweet spot, that nutritional ketosis.
1.0.
Yeah, 1.0 to 2.0. You can go higher, it can go all the way up to 3, but they find that really past 3, there's not really any added benefits. There's no need to go that far. And that is usually a longevity thing. Like, I can't be like super keto and automatically drive myself to 3, but day after day after day of doing this, it is possible to get that reading up towards 3. You don't reach that ketoacidosis level that a lot of people harp on being bad until you reach like 6 and above, and you almost can't do that by accident. That's normally seen in type 1 diabetics and other issues like that. Yeah.
Now, after 2 years for you, what are the numbers for you?
I mean, depending upon how I'm eating, like I can eat a very high carbohydrate diet for dinner and I won't be in ketosis. It does throw you out pretty immediately. So normal.
How long does it take to go back then?
It's a good question. It depends upon how, they call it metabolic flexibility. If you have never been in ketosis before, the very beginning, it could take you weeks to be transitioned for your body. Because again, you lost the ability to do that. Your body has forgotten. So once you have transitioned and you were able to produce those ketones and you were able to get into it, if you had a pizza, for example, the night before, you are not going to wake up the next morning and be in those high 2 levels. But if you're metabolically flexible, you could get back in there by the next day. They say 2 to 3 days. I've seen it respond much faster than that. And it's not an exact science. You don't have to kill yourself measuring every single morning. It's more of an awareness as you eat different foods. What does this do for me? A lot of people ask about drinking coffee in the morning. Does that throw me out of ketosis? That would be a good way to know. You can test yourself. You can drink your coffee. You can wait about 30 minutes and you can test yourself again.
What's the Keto Mojo cost?
So that machine, it comes with like a starter pack. It wasn't that expensive. It was about $150. And it came with some strips and the little lancet where you poke yourself with it and stuff like that. And then all of everything in there, buy it off Amazon. Yeah.
It's a blood test, it's not a urine test?
It is a blood test. You prick your finger just like you would a glucose test.
Okay.
The chips are cool. They're digitalized. You put it in and you basically just kind of scoop up the blood. It gets sucked into the machine and then you get a reading within like 3 seconds. It's cool. Yeah.
And it's measuring only the BHB?
It is measuring BHB is what it's measuring, the blood ketones, because that's the one circulating throughout the body. And again, it's just an awareness thing. So after a while, like if you had a really high carbohydrate diet, why test? You already know it's not going to be good, but getting into it, it's good to know the process you got. And once you're in there, every once in a while, you can use it to test different foods. You can use it to test different eating patterns. It's nice to know, but you don't have to do it every single day. It's not worth it.
And the breath machine is going to go after the acetone?
Yes, the breath machine goes after the acetone. This one's interesting as well. This one is a little bit more expensive, but there is no recurring cost to it. There's no strips or anything like that. It's a USB port, plugs directly into your computer, and you just blow into the little device here, sort of like a breathalyzer, and it reads the expelled acetone in the blood. it's cool. It's a little bit more expensive. I think it was like $225, something like that, but with no recurring cost, it's fine.
Okay.
And you can use it with different people. You obviously switch out the mouthpiece and clean it and stuff like that, but you can use it in practice if you wanted to.
What's that one called?
This one's called Ketogenics. There's 2 or 3 of them out there. This is probably one of the best ones out there. The only thing with this is if you don't have a patient or a client that has a healthy like lung capacity, the acetone actually only comes out with the very end of the breath. So if you just go, it's useless. So you kind of have to expel all the air, and then while you're running out of breath, like finish it. So it's a very weird feeling, kind of like you're suffocating yourself, but once you get used to it, it's not bad. And you breathe for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then take a deep breath again so you don't die. But yeah, it's a very, very cool machine, and it gives you a green, yellow, or red range, and you see where you are.
And it interacts with the Apple or PC
Anything.
or...
Yeah, it doesn't matter. That I plug right in. It stores everything. The Keto Mojo, actually, there's a little Bluetooth connection with your phone where you store it, so later on you can flip through and kind of see where you are on what date and stuff like that. But it's worth tracking. You just don't have to do it all the time, and it's worth knowing what these things are. But it's very, very cool.
That's why the reviews, they were very, very low on the breath one.
Yeah.
Probably
Because it's
people, they
complicated.
don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
They put it from the beginning and...
Yeah, no. It's that last little liter of breath in there. And the acetone is also sort of like the acetoacetate there, where it's kind of like a yes-no. You're either in ketosis or you're not. It's not going to give you like a 0.5 or a 0.8. It's not that specific because it's not measuring BHB. It's just measuring the volume of acetone coming out in your breath.
But the first one for the acetate,
Mhm.
what I understood, it's only when you are switching the first time, the first 3 weeks. Like not for him, for
Yep.
me will apply.
hmm
Once he's already in the process and he's applying
Yeah.
already the process for a while, you are not going to see the acetate.
With the first one, yes, it gets less effective. So that's why in the very beginning, it's like a yes, no, I got into it.
Yeah.
But if you maintain ketosis for months on end, which we'll also talk about, you're not supposed to do that. But if you maintain it for a long time, it's not as effective. It's not really looking at it because you don't expel as much of that throughout the urine. So then you would switch
Because
to
the
the
body already adapted to this process.
yeah,
So
and you're using it. You're just it's not as accurate. Really, the gold standard is the middle one, the ketonics. That's probably the best way to get a very specific number. But I thought there was something alluring about not having a recurring cost, so I bought the other one because it's fun to use.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is how we built it, and kind of getting into what you were doing. And this is kind of I take a modified approach to it. We don't do that 80% fat because it's actually very, very hard to maintain calories up at that high. You find yourself struggling, like how could I possibly even include more fat throughout your diet? You find yourself drinking oils and making little fat bombs and stuff like that just to push yourself that far, and you don't need to.
when you don't have the bread to eat that fat, it's very hard to...
Yes, you have no bread to eat the fat. That is certainly true.
incorporate more fat.
Yeah, and that's the first thing. So no bread. No, I'm just kidding. So carbohydrates, the goal is somewhere between 20 and 50 net carbs a day. That's kind of the overview there. And again, we're taking this as a blanket statement because depending upon the client coming in, some people are already there. Other people are still eating the standard American diet and they're nowhere near 50 net carbs a day. They're at like 100. It's a lot more struggle to get them down.
When we say no carbs,
Yeah.
we refer not bread, rice, and pasta.
I'll get back to that, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
even fruits, they have
Wait.
carbs.
Yeah, no, I cover all that, don't worry. But that's the number we're shooting for. Net carbs is total carbs minus fiber. So if something has 5 grams of carbs and 3 grams of fiber, that only counts as net 2. But I'll come back to that. But that's the goal. So for most people, we're starting them at 50, trying to talk about decreasing sugar, decreasing processed foods, getting rid of the high glycemic carbs, and just trying to make their diet just a little bit more strict. And we don't really touch anything else on that first appointment. We're just concentrating on that to see if they can handle it. Now, if they're already there and they're not eating anything, then great, we move on. But once we hit that 50, that's when we can kind of fine tune and nitpick a little bit more to get them down to that 20. But that hurts if you just rip it off like a Band-Aid. A lot of people are not used to giving up like soda and bread and stuff like that. They don't like that drop kick in there. Protein would be the next thing we would address. And this is a very common mistake that we'll talk about later, but around 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. That's the rough way to look at that. There are ways to get more specific where you could do it by poundage, but it needs to be of skeletal mass. And you
What,
can,
per day? Per
yeah,
meal?
per day. Yeah, per day.
Woohoo, I have so much to
Yeah, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. If you're doing pounds per body weight, it would need to be skeletal muscle, and there's no way to guess on that. You would actually need like a bioimpedance scan to know what the lean muscle mass is versus like fat and everything like that. So if you don't know that off the top of your head, it is way easier just to divide your total weight by 2.2. That gives you your weight in kilograms. Multiply it by 1, so it's the same answer. And then that is roughly how much you're going to aim for in the day in the beginning. Athletes and people actively trying to put on muscle, you can bump it up a little bit. Does that slightly affect the ketosis goal? Yes, a little bit, but you have to just kind of weigh what you're going for. If it's a college kid and he's putting on muscle, you know, pick one way you want to go here. So you can bump it up. Also, women breastfeeding, they do say that you want to bump that up as well to help that production. And then the fats, after you figure out those two categories, it's basically just you fill the rest in. So whatever that total number we were looking for in the beginning, everyone has that threshold. Once you figure out those two numbers, all the rest is composed of fats, and there's no real set limit or requirement. You just fill it in the rest. And so we'll start with carbs and what that means and kind of answer your question there. Conventional thinking, when you talk about the word carbohydrate and you look at the food guide pyramid, carbs are at the bottom. They want you to fill up on carbs, and they don't really even nitpick on what those carbs are. It's over 50% of the diet, and without any direction, this is what it ends up being. And even if you look at that food guide pyramid, they don't even really try to hide it. Like, they have pictures of cereal and bread and bagels and stuff like that. They're not even putting pictures of like sweet potatoes and couscous on there, but we want to avoid all of that stuff. I harp on cereal a lot, but I mean, really, it's any of this processed food, because this is what a lot of people do consider a carbohydrate. We do not. So that term is a lot weirder than fat and protein. That's pretty specific what you're talking about. Carbohydrate, though, can refer to so many different things, everything from like pretzels, chips, and cookies all the way to a piece of broccoli. It is all technically a carbohydrate. You can narrow it down by saying like non-starchy carbohydrate, but when you just say carb, you could literally be talking about anything. When we're trying to reach that goal, though, of those net carbs, you can't eat a lot of that stuff that you just saw in the other picture, because you will very rapidly blow right through that threshold and have no nutrients to show for it. It's just not a great way to eat overall. So when we say we're building those carbs, we're only talking about those nutrient-dense, non-starchy carbohydrates, going back to our fun thermometers here. Lots of nutrients, very little calories in those types of vegetables, as opposed to, again, like I said, not just donuts, but breads, rice, pastas, chips, cereals. They're all pretty much useless.
Would you say that green vegetables are even better because they're higher in fiber?
Green?
Yes.
They're higher in chlorophyll, which is why they're green.
I know that,
Yeah.
but they're actually pretty low in accessible carbs.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Like as opposed to like a potato or sweet potato, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, the starches, I kind of put them right with the breads and the...
Yeah, the fun slogan we run with a lot is green, leafy, and colorful non-starchy vegetables. It's a mouthful, so I eliminated that, but
That's great.
green, leafy, and colorful non-starchy vegetables. So that takes in like all the kale, spinach, pepper, stuff like that. Unless you read Gundry's book, then you can't eat any of that fun stuff anymore, because they're all high in lectins. Right, exactly. So yeah, or use a crock pot or an Instapot or something like that. But we can go off on all sorts of tangents. But this is what everything that you're not allowed to eat. This is with the slide that everyone hates. But basically sugar in all forms, because sugar is obvious, but everyone always raises their hand like, what about my all natural raw maple syrup? No, so none of it. It's all sugar. Doesn't matter if it's honey, maple syrup. Fructose is still fruit sugar. So if it is sugar, you cannot eat it. There are sugar replacements. The three big ones like aspartame, sucralose, and Splenda, certainly do not eat those.
That's stevia.
Yes, stevia is the one that I find okay. There are different brands that are better than others. There are certainly different brands that taste better than others. Some taste like a plant. It's awful. But other ones are much better. It doesn't ruin your coffee or your tea or your lemonade if you're making something like that. But stevia is just an extract of the stevia plant. And it doesn't elicit a glycemic response at all. Monk fruit is a newer one that's kind of interesting. I can't back that one 100%, but I find nothing wrong with it either. But the concept is there's enough fiber to offset the insulin spike that you would get from the little bits of sweetness in there, so it tends to be a net wash. So cool, that works, yeah. There's a couple other ones too, like Yacone and stuff like that.
Are those sweet extracts coming from amino acids, do you know? Are they proteins, basically?
Which one?
The stevia and the monk fruit.
Stevia is a plant.
Because
Yeah.
proteins are actually sweet.
Right, right. Like that's how they found aspartame by accident. But
There are no proteins, they are leafy plants.
yeah, well, right. It comes from the plant, but the monk fruit specifically is a fiber, so I would guess no. Gun to my head, I would say no about stevia too, but I've never technically looked that up. It comes from a plant. Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. I've never actually had that question be asked to me. You win a prize. Yeah. So yeah, no sugar there. Desserts is kind of the obvious one. What's that? Yeah, that is a baking form of stevia that gives a more equal 1-to-1 ratio with regular sugar. Because if it says 1 cup of sugar and you put in 1 cup of stevia, man, that'll, yeah, right. So Swerve is a more 1-to-1 ratio. It's fine. Yeah, depends upon what you're using it for. Used to drive me a little bit crazy with like diabetics and stuff like that, where they're saying like, can I use this? Can I use this? I'm making these brownies. My point is don't eat the brownies. Right, so yeah. A lot of the trouble though is when you're doing diabetic cooking and you're using cups and cups of like brownies and cookies and stuff like that. If you're using the sugar alcohols, which also technically fall in that OK category, massive digestive distress. So sucralose, maltose, things like that. Anything that ends in OS, gas, bloating, diarrhea, stuff like that, in excess. Like if you have a little piece of gum with that, like Spry is the big popular one, you're not gonna have any problems, but baking with it, I would watch out. Or if you have like 1,000 cups of coffee a day and you're putting a lot in, I wouldn't do that either. Yeah, the one we deal with most in practice is xylitol because it has antibacterial properties in the mouth.
Is that birch? I forget.
It is if you get it from birch. They've now found a way to do it from GMO corn, so that's mostly where you get it from now. Yeah. So when you find xylitol, it has to be xylitol from organic birch trees because that was how they did it. But it's a lot easier to do it through the corn, so you just have to be careful with that. Yeah, but great for your teeth. Yeah, so the desserts categories, that's pretty optional. It's pretty obvious. All those things have sugar and processed foods and bread and wheat and stuff like that. But the bread category goes into, again, all of them, doesn't matter. Quality can make others, like white's not great, wheat's a little bit better, rye, multigrain, whole grain. It's just this like cascade. They're all bread though. Even if you get into like heirloom variety with like spelt and barley and coot, it's good if you're just trying to avoid wheat, not wheat, sorry. Well, yeah, wheat, but gluten in general. Most people that have an issue with gluten problems with the white and the wheat bread, you can actually eat things like sprouted Ezekiel bread and be decent with it because the hybridization of wheat has made it much stronger. A reaction in our body. You could also blame glyphosate if you wanted to, but yeah. So, but for our purposes, we're eliminating all of them. Which means we have to be a little bit more creative with how we make sandwiches and stuff like that. Grains, again, that's another category, but pasta, rice, crackers. Yeah, don't eat sandwiches. Lettuce wraps and stuff like that. Yeah, there's lots of ways to get around that concept, but you're not having normal sandwiches anymore.
What about stuff like almond flour?
Yeah, so you can absolutely, if you mean to make your own bread?
Yeah.
Oh, if you got the time, go for it. Yeah.
I mean, but the fat still.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use almond flour in a lot of cooking. Like we still make, we have a young child at home. We do like pancakes and waffles and stuff like that. Almond flour, coconut flour. Sometimes you can actually just remove flour altogether and use like bone broth protein or something like that. And you can make very clean products that work and the kids have no idea. It's the same thing to them. But yeah, that works. I don't have the time to make my own bread. I wouldn't even know how to actually. But if you wanted to, it's probably a cool idea. I'll buy some. Yeah, it works really well.
Coconut flour is
Cabbage
cheaper to use instead of almond flour.
Yeah, it does have a stronger sweet taste to it. So depending upon the recipe, I would choose like one over the other. If I was trying to make something savory, I wouldn't put coconut flour in it. But if you're doing more like a fun dessert, it's a nice added touch.
There's a Korean cabbage that's actually a sweet cabbage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very thin and very rubbery, and you can use that very nicely.
For like sandwiches and stuff.
Bread.
Yeah, yeah.
Bread, wrap, whatever you want to call it.
Right, yeah, like you're going to like P.F. Chang's. Yeah,
High fiber.
yeah. But yeah, grains, ending the list with cereal, but all of them really, mostly snack food, stuff like that. None of them are applicable here. Fruit, someone mentioned that already, but on a ketogenic diet, fructose is the same as regular sugar. It does count. You can't have any fruit to begin with.
But avocado's fruit. And you can
So is the tomato. Yes, we can harp on the technicalities, yeah, but traditional high fructose bearing fruit, yes, out in the beginning until we can reteach the body how to burn that sugar again. Once you maintain that kind of metabolic flexibility, we'll talk about how to cycle on and off. And when we talk about cycling off, we're not talking about going back to eating all of those processed foods, but these are some of the foods that you would cycle off with: fruit, sweet potatoes, yams, stuff like that. You can incorporate that back in to bump up some of that, that sugar or glycogen storage in the body. But in the beginning, none of it. And then starchy vegetables, mainly the ones that really have no benefit anyway, like sweet potatoes and corn. You know, you can get good quality stuff like that, but for this purposes, it just breaks way down, down way too much.
Turnips and parsnips may still be on the menu.
In the beginning, probably not, but
Okay.
in the cycling portion of it, like absolutely, like sweet potatoes and stuff like that, they can all come and go in and out as you are able to do it. I harp on corn. I find no benefit for corn whatsoever. You don't even digest it very much. That's why you excrete out a lot of it. But you know what they're doing to it in general, it's very hard to find good quality. If you love it, go ahead. I don't find it necessary to include. But
Of the popcorn.
well, yeah, popcorn's a whole nother thing. Yeah, but
Why
yeah,
the nuts? The nuts are kind of
nuts.
fishy, yeah, like you can have some, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
too, but not really. Why nuts are a problem?
Well, they don't count as a carb, so we'll get there. Yeah, oh yeah, they're more like protein fat category than a carb, but you're right, there are some that are better than others.
Theoretically, I can have them, right?
Theoretically, there are some that are better than others. But this is what to eat, and this is kind of what you were mentioning: non-starchy vegetables, or green leafy non-starchy, colorful vegetables, if you will, and there's a whole bunch of them. They're all good, they all work. Pick your favorites, don't eat the ones you don't like. Get creative with how you make it. You can make salads, eat them raw, you can saute them for dinner. There's a bunch of different ways, but just going back to that, looking for the most nutrients you can find, decreasing the amount of calories overall. This is going to be the bulk of the food, not necessarily the bulk of the calories, but the bulk of what you're actually eating, because these guys fill you up, and the fiber. And then there's some that don't like quite fit into that top category there, but they're all so good for you that you can kind of have a little bit of them. But people always ask, like, aren't beets very high in sugar? Yes, they are. You can't have a lot of them, but you can incorporate these without being totally thrown out of ketosis with this little handy chart here. And I did it to everything was uniform, but I basically took 1 cup of all these different vegetables and figured out what that net carb would be. So you can see if you ate a cup of asparagus, 8 carbs, 4 fiber, it's only 4 net carbs in total. The beets are a lot higher. Where are they? So you end up with 9 total. So if we're trying to stay under 20 net carbs, that's a lot to have that, but you can still technically do it. But you can fill up on a lot of the stuff like spinach and some of the different, you know, the leafy vegetables like you were talking about.
And the greens are, like I said, a lot of fiber.
Yeah, and you can eat a ton of them, a ton of fiber, a ton of nutrients, and you're not getting anywhere near that max level there. So this is kind of what we're filling up on. And the picture, you know, who wouldn't want to eat that?
What is the number representing? What is a 4 or a 2?
Yeah, so
Carbs minus
carbs
fiber and
is like how many carbs they actually contain. And you can see this if you're eating box foods. They don't have these listed on like a side of a box of beets.
1 asparagus.
1 cup.
1 cup.
Yeah,
So it's all in
I made
cups.
everything a cup,
Okay,
so the
okay,
whole chart is
okay,
very
okay.
uniform. Yeah, 1 cup.
Garlic has carbs.
What's that?
Garlic?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not the same carbs as bread, but it's carbs. Yeah. I mean, so does broccoli. Yeah. I mean, all food have to have something, otherwise it'd be air. So quick note, this is, again, tying into Dr. Connor's talk here, a keto diet, especially when paired with intermittent fasting, decreases overall meals, because obviously you're not eating during intermittent fasting. And with the ketogenic diet, you're really not hungry in between meals, so you're not snacking or having those 3 to 5 meals a day. That was a really popular way of thinking, still is really. So vegetable intake is important because you're trying to drive those nutrients in, because if you're just eating 1 meal, 2 meals, you can get to the end of the day and very quickly not really have any kind of beneficial nutrients and vitamins in your diet. So besides eating the vegetables, you can get a little creative with how you actually get in a lot of those nutrients. You can consider it supplementation, but blending vegetables, creating smoothies, juices, stuff like that, still the same thing as eating it, except you can drink it in like 3 seconds. It works really well. I do that for work a lot, where I'll blend it in like 30 seconds in the morning, take that little NutriBullet with me, and now I have it for my break or work at lunch. And that's always my first meal of the day, depending upon when they give me lunch, somewhere around like 1 or 2 o'clock. And then I drink that, and I don't eat again for till later. Powdered greens, you can find these pretty much anywhere. You can get like a berry flavored one and mix it right with water. We have a chocolate one that we use a lot. I haven't found that in a lot of stores, but I think it's cool because you can put it in those smoothies and make it taste like chocolate peanut butter if you wanted to, and it still has a lot of vegetables. It's pretty much all vegetables, really. And then supplements, stuff like that, essential vitamins and minerals and fiber, carbs. Protein, though, is the next step. That's kind of what we're going to next. And this is where there's a lot of gray area and a lot of the information on TV and internet and books and stuff like that. And this is kind of the main split. You, if you wanted to, could replace that high protein diet with the word paleo, because that was popular for a very long time. Both restrict the carbs. That's a very important part. It's how it's kind of the foundation of everything. But the main difference is paleo is often very high protein, and the rest is fat, where keto switches that, where it's decreasing the protein and you're filling in the rest from fat. It's kind of the main difference between the two that we see. And protein is important, so you don't want to have zero or very, very low, because it does a lot of really nice things in the body. And you can kind of read over this, amino acids, it's good for muscle mass and neurotransmitters and stuff like that. But very, very important to get it, but in excess. And this is where a big mistake is, and we covered a little bit later, but this is a big reason why a lot of people can't quite get into ketosis. They lower the sugar, they increase the fat as much as they can, but they're still eating too much fat. And if you're depriving the body of sugar, it kind of panics and it says, well, I still want this sugar. I'm not quite ready to burn all that fat yet. And actually it just processes that protein through through gluconeogenesis. It produces sugar anyway. So it still ends up the same as if you just ate the sugar in the beginning.
The protein ends up to be sugar?
Yeah.
If your body wants it bad enough, yeah. Yeah. And this is why, and again, we'll talk about it later, like if you say,
That was very strange.
yeah,
Very strange.
say you had like a perfectly zero carbohydrate diet, near impossible to do, but there are certain parts of your body that need glucose to run, not your brain, which people keep saying, but like red blood cells are an example. There's no mitochondria in red blood cells, so they do need that, that sugar. So if you're not eating any, you're not going to die. Your body's going to churn out that sugar through this process right here. Yeah. And it's very, very small amounts that it needs. So we're not talking about massive amounts, but if you just keep pouring more and more protein into it, you're going to end up with massive amounts, and then your blood sugar is still going to be high, just as if you ate the sugar. Yeah.
Now, all those greens that we talked about, they're actually loaded in proteins.
Yeah, but not the same as if you ate like a 40-ounce steak 3 times a day. Yeah. We're talking about more of like the gluttony of America, with the overconsumption of the large portion sizes of protein. You can Google real quick like portion sizes throughout the year. It's pretty interesting to see. Even fast food chains change like their hamburgers here, and now it's like this big, and that's normal. We eat too much. Quality matters and stuff like that as well, but in general, like a normal portion size of protein, sometimes they say it's just the size of your hand, palm. That's small. Yeah, when most people think about it. So it's really all we need in a single meal, coming from different sources and things like that. But a lot of people don't eat that. Yeah, and a lot of restaurants don't even offer that. You know, some people say like, why would I want the 6 ounce? Give me the 12. I mean, it happens all the time. So these are some of the foundational things that we would like talk about. Eggs are huge. Quality will always matter. We'll kind of wrap back to quality later, but pasture-raised eggs and pasture-raised chicken, different than cage-free, by the way. That's just a weird marketing term. Cage-free is better than nothing, but I think the definition of cage-free is they're allowed to open the door for like 1 hour a day so they can get out.
Actually in a row.
Yeah.
We had 50 chickens.
It's like the allure of freedom, but not quite. There are other ones I've seen where they actually just move the cage. So they're outside, but they just keep moving the cage. I guess that's okay, but they should be allowed to roam and eat, not just the grass, but they get the bugs and everything like that by accident. So pasture raised, but it's hard to find unless you're going to like a co-op or something like that. You can't roll up to Acme and find pasture raised eggs. It's very hard. Cage free you can, but, and also vegetarian fed eggs, that's a cool new marketing term. It's just GMO, yeah, it's just GMO corn. Yeah. So grass-fed meat, and if you can get it, birth to death, so or grass-fed, grass-finished. So they'll marketing again drives everything. They realize that people want grass-fed meat, so what they do is they produce grass-fed meat, and at the very end they just feed them a whole bunch of grains to fatten them up, and they can legally still call it grass-fed. So you're looking for grass-fed, grass-finished, but again, hard to find. Wild-caught fish, this one's been common for quite a while. Everyone knows that farm-raised fish is not very good for them. There's a whole bunch of reasons, but again, kind of the same concept as the chickens. You want it out in the ocean getting the food chains that it normally would get, not trapped in a cage eating the stuff that they put in there.
Corn.
Yeah, you're right, corn. Yeah, and not to mention all the stuff they dump in there so they don't get any diseases and stuff like that. Bone broth is fantastic source, whether you make your own, supplement with it. There are some good pre-made ones as well. I like Kettle and Fire. There's another one called Brodo. You will pay for the convenience of them making it for you. Depends on how much time you have. But bone broth, making your own is really fun. You don't have to do it like a witch anymore, like a giant cauldron. You can do it in a crock pot. That's actually really easy because you can leave that go for 24, 48 hours without worrying about that open flame. So I found that a lot easier to accomplish before I realized you could do that.
Why do you have to boil it so long?
To take all the
Because they said
nutrients and
so.
the collagen
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, it's a long process. You can't just stir a couple bones for a while. It's a process of leaching that out.
In 2 hours, like 2-3 hours, but not.
Much longer than that. It's the same concept as why you don't want to boil vegetables, because you boil your broccoli, all the nutrients leach out into the water. You scoop out that broccoli and you eat very nutrient deprived broccoli and you dump out all those nutrients in the water. So don't boil vegetables unless you're making a stew, because then you drink the water. That's fine. But for bone broth, you need time for that leaching of like everything she said, the collagen, the minerals, the immunoglobulins and stuff like that.
In order for all the minerals to leach into the water,
Mm-hmm.
you put it in the cold water for half an hour before you start boiling it. And then you boil it for 4 hours and you have everything there. It stays like very solid when it's cold.
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, it's not a cooking show, and I'm not a chef, but everything. Yeah. No, I mean, no, I certainly believe you, but everything I've seen, all the seminars I've attended, there's a couple good ones we've went to where it was actually hands-on cooking and everything like that. All the bone broth was pre-made for 24 hours at least, boiling in the pot. Right or wrong, I don't know, but that's just the information that I have. 4 hours is better than no hours. Yeah. But certain nuts and seeds, getting back to what you were saying, some nuts and seeds are higher in protein than others. So if you were eating large amounts of nuts and seeds, you would want to go for the ones that were much higher in fat and much lower in protein. Macadamias are probably the best. They have the most ratio of protein to fat, a lot more fat in there. Walnuts are pretty good. Almonds are the other way. Almonds are much more protein than fat in there. So does that mean you can't have them? No. But it's if you're going to pick a nut, I mean, macadamias are delicious. You know, they're the way to go. And then the excess thing comes into that, because like a serving size of almonds is like 6. You can't have a lot of them. I don't personally eat a lot of almonds because I have a problem with quantity. So if you say, here's 6 almonds, I'm like, no, thank you. I'm going to eat the whole bag. So I just don't do it. But I do know people who say, like, look at my healthy snack, and it's like a Ziploc bag, and that's probably like 2,000 calories of almonds right there. So very healthy, not so good for weight loss and maintaining like that. So you have to be careful with the nuts and the seeds, because it adds up so quickly.
I always heard 2 ounces, all the nuts and seeds you take in a day.
Yeah.
Try to keep it in that range.
Yeah, I mean, 6 to 12, I don't know, count it out. Like it's not a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It ends up being a lot of protein and a lot of fat.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah, it adds up. And then raw grass-fed dairy, again, the quality of the dairy matters. Dairy gets demonized for a lot of different reasons. If you have an allergy to it, though, you should avoid it. But most of the problems with dairy in general comes from the overprocessing of that, the pasteurization, the homogenation, stuff like that. And then again, tracking back that timeline of, well, what was that cow eating? That matters to what that cow produced, the milk and the cheese and everything like that.
What do you think about bone broth if you buy it like a hydrostate?
And like
So it's already, look, collagen hydrostate. So it's been broken down. If you use that as a
Hydrolyzed.
protein, hydrolyzed collagen.
Yeah, like in powder form.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I use it every day.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Straight.
clean protein.
Yeah.
And it's nice, complement of amino acids.
Right, because before that became very popular, when you were saying like, I want a protein shake, your real options were whey, soy, and casein.
Yeah.
They all have issues.
Yep.
Soy I would just throw out, but whey is probably the best of the all evils. But it's so processed again. Where are they getting it from? What kind of cows are they getting it from? That matters. So you can find grass-fed whey, which is actually pretty good quality. Little off topic, but if you consume a lot of whey, it actually upregulates the mTOR pathway. I don't know how much anyone's ever talked about that, but it very rapidly accelerates aging, which is ironic because it's the same pathway that athletes and bodybuilders would try to achieve on purpose for muscle growth. And think about 80-year-old bodybuilders; they don't look great, but in their prime, that is what you're trying to do: stimulate insulin, stimulate that mTOR pathway, very rapid muscle growth, but very rapid aging as well. So if you're just doing it for health and not for athletes or sports or anything like that, switching away from whey is ideal. Now you could get into a lot of plant-based ones. I think they all taste like plants, but I mean, to each their own. I go towards the bone broth, either the straight collagen or the bone broth collagen mix. And again, any flavor you want, you can make it taste like chocolate peanut butter if you wanted to. They're all pretty good quality. Yeah, I like it. I've had people give me powder before and they asked me like, oh, just add water. That doesn't work well, at least in my experience. It never tastes like the real thing when you actually make it with the bones for more than 4 hours. But yeah, so going back to fats, this is the last category here of how to build this. So once we get the carbs and the protein, all the rest gets filled in with fat. And just like the carbs and the proteins, directing people to what that fat kind of matters. Not my graphic, I stole it from Dr. X, but this is a pretty cool list of mostly cooking oils, because in our opinion, you can only eat so many like physical fats, you know, just through meals. A lot of the fat intake actually comes from what you're cooking in. And as you cook your vegetables or whatever in that pan, that fat gets coated directly onto the foods, and you just consume them like that. So a lot of people don't count that or think of that as being included, but it's a way to get a majority of these fats in there. So the ones not to cook with are most of those processed vegetable oils, and you can read the list there. Grapeseed was real popular for a while. Margarine, of course, was very popular when everyone was afraid of butter. But most of those, just avoid in general. Most of the ones that are on the good fat to cook with, butter, coconut oil is fantastic. Ghee is actually more heat stable than butter. Tallow is a little bit of a weird one, but it works.
That's meat.
It's a form, yeah, it's like a fat, yeah. You don't normally find it like, I mean,
Kind of
you can find it, but yeah.
You can find it at Weaver's Way, maybe.
Yeah, it's not very common. So usually when you're talking about cooking, ghee and coconut oil are very heat stable. Butter works as well, grass-fed, of course.
What your parents would say with a coffee can.
Yeah.
That would have been tallow.
Yeah.
She would have whipped it out and put a little of that in the pan instead of butter.
Right, see, they were doing it before it even became popular. Avocado is one that's really good. That's actually very heat stable. It's a little expensive, but if you were looking for just like an oil to pour in a pan real quick, that's good to go with. Olive oil is great to eat. It's not so great to heat at really high temperatures. So like if you were cooking on a stove, usually when you turn that heat on like high, medium, you're normally way above the smoke point of olive oil. So it's great for baking when you can control it at like 350, 375, but mostly the ones up there would be more heat stable.
I would stay away from cooking with olive oil. It tastes great, but it's bad.
Yeah. Palm oil is another one. I don't use that a lot, but I know people do. It's more heat stable.
Palm oil is a saturated fat.
So is coconut oil.
Right.
Right.
But they said for years it's
Yeah.
a bad oil for you.
Yeah.
Which one?
Saturated fats in general. Just recently they said it again. There was a huge disclaimer put out, by the government, ADA. It was paid for by the other industry. So I mean, the conflict of interest. You can find it. It's a whole big paragraph on how saturated fats and this whole rise in coconut oil is harming people. And then if you dig just a little deeper, a lot of really smart people on the internet wrote rebuttals on that, and they're fun to read. There's about 5 or 6 doctors I know that have really, really great scientific rebuttals, nitpicking each one, and they're fun to read as well. But
The sunflower surprised me that it's in the bad category.
They oxidize
Because
quickly.
Yeah.
it's processed.
yeah,
It's
same thing with
refined.
flaxseed oil. Like you never want that stuff anywhere near heat. Flaxseed oil oxidizes very quickly. Fun fact: they used to heat flaxseed oil to varnish wood. Yeah. So don't eat wood varnish. But yeah, most of those plant-based ones, like if you were going to use it, you would use it as like a salad dressing and stuff like that. Some are better than others. A lot of people eat them for the omega-3, that sort of stuff. Everybody converts plant-based omega-3 to the EPA and DHA that we need slightly differently, so it does work better for some people over others. There's no way to know that. So some people work very nicely and their blood markers are spun and everything like that with plant-based omega-3s. Other people need the actual EPA, DHA, whether it's fish oil, krill oil, something like that.
The DHA is actually 2 steps away, so it's
Yeah.
much harder to make.
Yeah, you lose it. Like you have to take in so much to go down, and I mean your brain loves DHA. There's so much good benefits from coming from that. Animal source would be better, but not saying that you can't have flaxseed oil. Flax seeds would be better. Grind them up yourself. Don't buy them pre-ground. So healthy fat, whole list. There's a bunch more, but these are kind of the main staples. Avocados are the ones everyone knows about. Hopefully you don't have an allergy. I had a client once that said they had an allergy. I was like, oh, I give up. But avocados are very good. Eat a lot of them, guacamole. They're awesome. Grass-fed butter. Some people are so removed from modern day nutrition, like that one blows them away. Like, I'm allowed to eat butter? As long as you go find the Kerrygold or something like that, yeah, you can switch back away from margarine, hopefully into these better quality foods. Whole eggs, that already fit into the protein category, but again, that yolk specifically is very high in a lot of healthy fats. One of the only sources of dietary choline, very especially important for cell walls.
And it causes burning of fat in the liver.
Yeah,
So if you
phosphatidylcholine,
wanna
yeah.
burn your liver fat, that's what you need to eat.
Yeah, and without it, like,
It won't happen.
can you think of another source?
There's no other good source.
Yeah. So eggs, yeah. Coconuts and coconut oil. MCT oil is a derivative of coconut oil. It's those medium chain triglycerides. It's kind of like the supplemental form, if you will, of coconut poured in coffee and stuff like that. Anyone use that? No, it's fun, yeah.
MCT or?
MCT, yeah. Because the main...
That's in all your keto shakes.
Pretty
It'll
much.
say MCT.
The main benefit is it's the only one of all of these that actually bypasses normal digestive processes. It gets immediately uptaken into the mitochondria and turned into almost instant energy. So if you want a very quick way to get into ketosis, take a bunch of that, and it's like a little cheat, but like it almost automatically kicks you in. You might not stay in, but that's instant ketone production.
It's not the same as coconut.
It's derived from coconut oil, but they
So what if I put a spoon of coconut oil in
there's other fats in coconut oil. Remember that picture from the beginning? There was the giant, yeah. There's so many in there. We talked about palmitic oil, right? MCT is just medium chain triglycerides, and that exact length.
It's like 3/4 of 5s, right?
Yeah, caprylic and capric acid are the two big ones. They go right in. Yeah, the other ones don't. Not saying they're bad for you, but
No,
if
but it's $30 a bottle probably. I don't know.
it is, yeah,
Yeah.
27.
right.
By the way, one of those
I mean,
is
one.
lectin shield.
What's that?
One of those is the key ingredient, lectin shield.
Yeah, very, very powerful for that. But you don't use a lot. 1 teaspoon is 100 calories, so you can't go crazy with this stuff because it adds up very quickly. I was telling him the story that you watch someone make bulletproof coffee, so to speak, and if they're not measuring that out or being very careful with it, you can't just eyeball it. Like that could very quickly be 300-400 calories in your 1 cup of coffee, and that's not really a good thing either. Oh, I missed some, sorry. Yeah, full fat hard cheeses, dark chocolates, things like that. Nuts and seeds, macadamia and walnuts are the best for the fat content. And then the ones down there, cream cheese, heavy whipping cream, you can put that in coffee. It's better than like whole fat milk or even worse, skim milk.
Now, you kind of prefer things like raw cheeses, which would be real cheeses
Yeah,
over
yeah.
in Europe.
Yeah, not Kraft peel and stick
Pasteurized.
cheese or, cheese, yeah.
So,
Cheese
find
whiz.
2 or 3 cheeses in any store that are actually really good to hunt.
Yeah. And, real cheese, basically. Hard cheese, the ones you have to cut. There's a myriad of different ones.
Enzymes, I
Yep.
should say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And aged, they'll usually be aged.
Yeah, and they're usually a little expensive, but you pay for the quality. Olives and olive oil too. Olives are a good snack. Yeah. And so here are the benefits.
Olives are good snack.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many? 6?
Don't get many more-
Almost 6.
Oh,
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
That almost illustrates the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 6. Yeah, we'll go with that. So I did a little top 10 list on the benefits because Dr. Connor said not just to harp on weight loss. But before we get into the top 10, I just want to mention real quick because the main thing that when you look up all the research on the ketogenic diet, it's mostly used in epilepsy and seizure disorders. And that is very heavily researched, but not a common seen application. It's just a very common researched one. And the interesting thing, it dates back very far, all the way to 500 BC, but the main popular areas was in the 1920s. And that continued that way until about 1940 when they invented medicine that did it, in their opinion, better, because you can sell the medicine, you can't sell high-fat diets. But that continued that way with medicine until recently, actually, they have shifted back because they're trying to maintain or accomplish the goals that they had originally, but without using all the side effects of the medication. So it is kind of cool to see that shift back there.
There's epilepsy.
Epilepsy and seizure disorders, yeah.
Seizures, okay.
Yeah.
That's how it came up.
And the exact mechanism of that is still a little debated, but it's basically about making the brain work a little better, stability of neurons, and then upregulating the mitochondria, more energy production. You'll see in just a second, there's better signaling pathways and stuff like that when you start using that BHB ketone as the actual energy source in the brain.
So therefore, it should also help the heart. Those are the 2 heavy mitochondria
Helps a lot of things, yeah. Hearts, I didn't do that as its own category, but it was like a subcategory, but yeah, very beneficial for that. I did start with weight loss just to spite him, but it's very important. It happens whether you wanted to or not, and it's very good. And we already talked about all this, so I can kind of blow through it a little bit, but when you restrict the carbs, there's no choice for your body to find that energy from a different source. And hopefully, as you learn to burn the fat foods that you're eating, your body's also going to be able to produce, burn the fat stores that you have, which is good. Also, reducing carbohydrates reduces circulating insulin, which is the fat storing hormone. Fun fact, you cannot burn fat if you have elevated levels of insulin. It's almost like an instant shut-off switch. Other way around, talking about that choice that some people had to make.
You could be at a 3 and eat something that's a hot carb,
Mm-hmm.
like orange juice.
Yeah.
You're done.
As soon as insulin spikes, fat shuts off. Fat burning shuts off. The ironic thing is, again, going back to athletes and burning or building muscle and stuff like that, they spike insulin on purpose. It's a very anabolic hormone when it's high in there. I've actually seen people drink like a gallon of creatine and sugar on purpose to get that spike of glucose in the system. Builds muscle, also gives you diabetes, but it builds muscle and it shuts off fat production, which is where the whole myth of like you cannot put on muscle and burn fat, so it turned into bulking and cutting cycles, but irrelevant. But that's why the insulin, as soon as that is on, you can no longer burn fat. So we're trying to keep that low or stabilized as much as possible, so you're in that constant fat burning environment. I started doing this for every single topic. It just got way too tedious, so you're just going to take my word for it. If you go on PubMed and other different reference sites like Green Med Info and stuff like that, which is basically a holistic PubMed, that's a cool site if you've ever seen that one. Green Med Info. Green Med, yeah. It is basically a holistic PubMed.
For nutraceuticals?
Everything.
Okay.
They have countless articles on there. It's very well done. Everything. Yeah, very, very cool. Get on their mailing list. They send fun stuff. But yeah, whole bunch. You know, one search for obesity and ketones, you get about 1,500 results, but you get it. Moving on, that stabilizing of the blood sugar and the weight loss, this is that cascading effect. You get other benefits as well, basically because when you control that blood sugar, you can't help but correct all those things on the bottom too. You see your blood work stabilize quite nicely as a result. It's just a happy benefit. And so the ketogenic diet, again, this is benefit number 2. We're going to do increased energy, but more importantly, reduced hunger. It's why it works with that fasting concept so well. Because we're not restricting calories, so we're not trying to starve ourselves, we're just restricting carbohydrates. So you should be as full as you were eating regularly. And you know, in the higher fat foods themselves, they themselves are more satiating, so you don't feel the need for that sugar spike, sugar crash. You need to eat more and stuff like that. It just fills you up more. Gives you that sustained energy and reduced hunger, and that's why you can go longer in between meals, so no snacking in between, and then hopefully no nighttime snacking, which you see a lot. People get hungry at like 8, 9, 10. It's kind of like the witching hour. It's not what we want to do. And then you can go with that intermittent fasting as well. And this is kind of interesting. You lose that crash, first of all, so no afternoon crash here. And the ketones give energy to pretty much everywhere in the body. I mentioned there are some places that can't quite use this, but that old adage of like the brain needs glucose for fuel, the brain uses glucose very rapidly, but it can use ketones, specifically that BHB, if you kind of shunt it or force it to, which is where they get all that neurological benefit from. If the body needs that glucose, like we were talking about, it'll make it. Gluconeogenesis, stuff like that, it'll find it in some way. This is a hormone reason too. It's not just like I ate more fat, I feel fuller. It actually shuts off ghrelin, which is kind of the reason hormonally why we feel hungry. Yeah, which is kind of cool. It reduces that, but even cooler on the flip side, it increases leptin. So it decreases the I'm hungry hormone and it increases the I'm full hormone. And down there, without changing metabolic activity, like you would get when you try to drastically reduce calories. So it works very well for a hormone reason too. Mental focus. This goes back to improving the brain, which is very neat. Despite the saying you need glucose for the brain, ketones, BHB specifically, are a very adequate and beneficial fuel for that to use. And one of the neat arguments really is glucose requires a couple steps to get in. It's not so passive transport. Ketones go right through a blood-brain barrier. It's immediate transport. There's not that extra step where glucose needs to do it, and it's used quite rapidly. Stabilization of sugars, it alters the brain chemistry, sort of like you were talking about with the seizure disorders. You get more neuron connectivity, you get more signaling. People talk about mental clarity, less headaches and stuff like that. They just seem to be able to focus better when they're on that into that ketosis range, which is nice, especially for people with headaches. You can blame headaches on so many different things, structural things. You can blame it on gluten and stuff like that. But some of it is just you just eat too much sugar. It's very common to see that, especially when you eat too much sugar and then you try to pull it away from someone. That's why you get angry or hangry. Again, going back to the increased neurotransmitters, most of the brain stuff, they're kind of guesses almost on why it works. They see this result in clinical studies and then they say, well, that's probably what's causing all the improved benefits. But I don't think anyone's actually coined a very specific reason for that. Do we want to take a break at this point? It's kind of right in the middle.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's take 5 minutes. Bathroom if you need it.
Action. All right. So fourth benefit of ketosis, I'm not going to get too deep into this one because it gets super complicated, but it's worth mentioning because if you look up a list, this is always mentioned because it is a lot or heavily researched. We actually went to a seminar about 2-3 weeks ago that was just solely on fasting, ketogenic diet, cancer, and the microbiome. They did a whole hour talk on NLRP3 pathways. Very, very cool information, but basically the BHB ketone will provide anti-inflammatory effects through this pathway. It inhibits it. And then basically this NLRP3, it's linked to so many different chronic diseases. So they found by inhibiting this, you can actually reverse and treat a lot of these chronic inflammation diseases. You all know what those are. But you get little things that clear up too, like acne and eczema and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. All of that is just by inhibiting. This is also not the only way to inhibit that. They just found out that it works, and then they ran with that research. But again, the guy went through all of that stuff down there. It was very, very cool information, but you just know that it works. This gets back to the seizure disorders and epilepsy, but it doesn't just work for epilepsy. It works for all of the things that are kind of linked to neurological problems. So Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, stuff like that. And again, it's all similar concept. No one's got the exact answer. But when you cut off glucose to the brain, you increase, because you make it use that BHB ketone, you increase connectivity, better signaling, and things just typically work better. So at the bottom it says cellular damage and tumors. That's kind of the extreme effect of this, but your brain just is more clear overall. This one is
I heard even reverse Alzheimer. It's reversing Alzheimer.
Yeah.
If you start drinking.
I don't know if I'm allowed to claim that, but yeah, they have a lot of really neat effects from that. Probably a lot of those neurological effects, it matters exactly what the root cause of that was. But if it was just this wacky, slow degrade of neurons in the brain, then yes, increasing all of that, you could see a reversal of a lot of those symptoms. But if it was trauma, like a concussion and something like that, it's not as much of a light switch, but you do get improvement no matter what the cause. You just might not always get a cure. Yeah, and for people who have those types of diseases, any improvement is magnificent. This is a huge one, and this is kind of the premise how a lot of the benefits actually work. It upregulates mitochondria, which are the things inside all of our cells that make the energy. Bioclast, the powerhouse of the cell. You had to repeat that in a weird rhyme. But yeah, it works very well. That's what is producing all of this ATP. No matter what you're putting into the cycle, Krebs cycle, everyone remember that, electron transport chain, that happens mostly in the mitochondria. And so when you can maintain ketosis for long enough, you get two effects. Basically, the mitochondria work better, and you actually get more numbers of them, which is kind of cool. It's like a double whammy there. So the more that are working, the more you have, the more energy you get. With that increased energy, it's like a slow cascade. It's kind of cool. Cells work better. When they work better, they start functioning more properly, and you get a dump of some of the toxins that might be a little bit more stagnant in poorly functioning cells. They don't release toxins as well as healthy cells. It's why they become sicker and sicker and sicker. And the sick cells, really sick cells that are just beyond absolute repair, they like sacrifice themselves. It's called autophagy. It's cell suicide. They're beyond repair. They can't help the greater good anymore. They die off and they get recirculated throughout the body. And we'll mention in a second, but most anti-aging therapies, they're trying to induce autophagy, to get rid of the bad cells, get all new good cells in. That's the end goal of almost all of it. And so by these ketones going into the mitochondria, getting almost instant energy, it is very similar to the benefits that they try to accomplish with either hydrogen therapy or NADH therapy. We don't get a lot into NADH, but we use a lot of hydrogen therapy in the dental office because it's actually a very powerful selective antioxidant for radiation, and we have to take x-rays, so this is a really cool way to protect against that. But ketones produce very similar benefits, and like a couple other things I said, it's free. And, you don't have to swallow hydrogen or NADH supplements. You're in ketosis, you have this BHB, and you get the same exact benefits. And that leads right into number 7, anti-aging therapy, but NAD therapy, supplemental forms and stuff like that, very, very popular to talk about in the anti-aging realm. I just found that Time Magazine actually had a whole section on it. They called it the true anti-aging pill, which is probably a huge endorsement. I'm sure there was a huge spike in sales when that happened. But all it does really is it activates downstream signaling pathways. It doesn't really matter what it is, but the main one is called the sirtuin pathway. Again, you can look that up. It's fun to read about that sort of things, but we're going to cover that it works, and you get those longevity benefits that you would, and that's why it works for anti-aging therapy. So NAD and NADH, they're all cofactors of that Krebs cycle. They're kind of byproducts of the energy pathway, but they don't just disappear. They're actually signaling molecules that have other benefits, and you can supplement with more of those if you wanted to. The reason why it works, or the way that it increases or gets similar benefits to actually swallowing it, is the fact that it just uses up less of them. So when you have glucose going in, it uses up 4 molecules of the NAD, whereas the ketones only use up 1. So you get the same energy output, and like we talked about earlier, more energy output with the fat. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, how it burns cleaner. It's not using up as much as the stuff that produces the same amount of energy throughout the body. This is a great one as well. You had a shirt with this literally written on it a second ago. But NRF2 is a really...
You noticed that?
Well, yeah. Not many people walk around with shirts that say that. But NRF2 is basically a master regulator of antioxidants in the system. I don't know if they were the very first ones that did it, but Zymogen was a company that actually created a supplemental form that was called NRF2.
It's not the first one.
Okay, but yeah, that's who I heard about it first. It was a couple of years ago, but got really big, popular, everyone talked about it. But basically, when you have this upregulated, it takes sick cells and goes and kind of brings them back to normal cells. It regulates oxidative stress. It can tell when things are not going well. It turns on pathways. Ketone bodies do this. They upregulate NRF2. Anyone know the other thing that does it a lot? Sulforaphane. Anyone know where that comes from?
Broccoli.
Yeah, there you go. I also don't think you can eat enough broccoli to have the same effects. That actually has to be taken in pill form, sort of like resveratrol. Yeah, like you can't drink 2 gallons of wine, but you can supplement with resveratrol and stuff like that. But yeah, they isolated that sulforaphane to upregulate NRF2. Ketones do the exact same thing. So it's very, very cool, very powerful for that. And again, going back from sick cells to optional functioning cells, it's a very repetitive end result here. All these benefits add up. You're going away from things that are not functioning back to healthy, normal functioning cells, increased mitochondria, dumps out those toxins. Things just simply work better. I did a whole section on autophagy because it wasn't really adequate to just mention it real quick at the end of the other one, because this is huge. It's one of the main benefits that keto does, also a main benefit of fasting. Again, why it works so well. Fasting, the interesting thing is most adults eat on a 12-12 split. Like if I ate dinner at 8 and then I ate again at 8 in the morning, that would kind of be typical. Most people are actually worse than that. They snack late at night and they wake up at like 6 for breakfast. But if you can delay that just by 1 hour and you can get to 13 instead of 12, autophagy actually kicks on just at the 13th hour. So not hard to just delay it by 1 hour. Yeah. So the sick and damaged cells basically self-destruct. They die off in replace of new cells. They actually are reabsorbed, and the new cells can use the old cells as energy. It's kind of interesting. It's like capitalism. But all anti-aging therapies, like I said, they're aiming for this exact goal. They're trying to induce autophagy to clear out those sick cells and get those new cells back in. This is the last one, genetic signaling. I thought this was fascinating because it's basically the topic of epigenetics, how we all are kind of born with a set blueprint of genes, but we're not just strapped to those. You can alter or change the expression of that through dietary and lifestyle habits and stuff. As we age, you're not just doomed to begin with because your mom or dad gave you bad genes. But just like other things can cause epigenetics, ketones play right into the role, and they do that mostly through the mRNA pathway. If you remember back from chemistry class, or bio, I guess it was, they used to call that junk DNA. They didn't know what it did, so they said like, well, 80% of it's junk, which was a weird thing to just conclude, but they found that it's not, even though it's not actual DNA and it doesn't go code for more proteins, it turned out to be like a signaling thing. It flips different genetic expresses on or off to then go code for proteins. So mRNA actually matters, and ketones go into that. There's a really cool process of thinking with mRNA that it is one of the only things in the body that aren't species specific. And as you consume different foods, you are inheriting their signaling pathways of mRNA. So if you were eating very stressed out and sick animals, you get signaling pathways through your genes to turn on the stressed out and sick problems. And that is all mRNA, because the chicken's one it works just the same in our body. I don't have any research on that, but it's a really cool pathway of thinking, and it's out there on the internet. You can read about it. It's pretty neat.
I understand a lot of drugs actually work on this.
Yeah, to turn things on and off. Mostly off. Everything's suppressive, but like headaches aren't a deficiency in Motrin, so like we would rather turn things on. You know that. But yeah, and the list goes on. I could have kept going for a while, but cancer treatment, women's health with fertility and problems, and things like that. Eye health, I thought that was pretty neat. Digestion is a big one, just because sugar causes so much inflammation, stuff like that. Gallbladder health is interesting because if you already have gallbladder problems, you have to be a little bit more careful by just flooding someone's diet with fat. But most of the gallbladder problems that I see is related to stagnation, where they don't use it enough. So it kind of gets hardened and it just doesn't work properly. So easing them in and getting these healthy fats in, it allows the release of the bile, and things do tend to even out and work better. A little bit more difficult when you remove your gallbladder, but there's ways around that as well, and kidney function. This is the last section that I usually talk about, because when people come in, this is what you have to kind of cover. Nobody comes in to say, like, give me the top 10 reasons why I should eat the way you think. But mistakes are very important to cover, because if you just say, go eat more almonds or something like that, like you have to kind of talk about why you would do certain things and not. And if you don't do these things spot on, some of them can be detrimental, but most of the time you just make all that effort not really worth anything. You don't get a lot of the benefits. If you're kind of like teetering into ketosis, but not quite. Might get other benefits like a little bit of weight loss and stuff like that, but to really get the full benefits, you're going to want to avoid some of these mistakes. And we were talking earlier, most of these mistakes, someone coined this along the lines, they wrap it up into this little, this term called the keto flu, where you can get certain symptoms and they just say like, oh, that's the keto flu. Usually lasts about 2 to 3 days. If you're really bad, it could last a couple weeks, but all of it right there, it's all very easily explained. So a lot of people see this list and they would say, why would I ever want to do this diet if I'm going to experience all of this? But it doesn't happen in everyone, and it mostly happens in people that are just not really ready for the diet and they just jump in way too quick. The first 5 are actually explained by just the simple fact that you're just not able to burn the fat yet. So when you pull all that sugar away, especially if you do it like a Band-Aid and you just eat way down at like 20 net carbs, yeah, your body's can't use the glucose yet, the fat yet. You took away all its source, and these things just break down very quickly. You're tired, your brain doesn't work, you get very irritable and different food cravings and stuff like that. So it's worth noting, for people who are not used to it or have never been in ketosis, you do have to slide them in a little slower.
Would they show up as being in ketosis during this phase if they weren't used to it yet, or would they just show up as hungry and angry?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, like if we were doing a blood reading, they probably would not be very high on that. They might reach like 0.5 or something, like where you're like, okay, you're almost there, but Certainly if they've never done it before, you don't go from like 0 to 1.5 just by eating well in one day. It takes a while to slide into ketosis. And along the way, if you're doing it like I'm going to do this right now, you're going to get, you're going to be a little miserable for a while. Could you push through it? Sure, you could. Not the great way to do it, the whole no pain, no gain thing. You don't really want to kill yourself on the way, but that's just not really the right way to do it. You want to ease those people in who have never done it before in their lives. The muscle soreness, again, you're just temporary low glycogen stores. Your body's just not used to replenishing them in the right way from different types of things.
Is this where something like a tool like the Mojo would help a person to realize that they're actually making progress even if they're miserable?
Yeah, it could be a motivation thing. Unless I guess you read bad and then you're miserable and you didn't pass the test. It's a way. Yeah, if you guide them in slowly, you can absolutely avoid all of them. You don't need to experience any of these symptoms. Some people who have already eaten really well their entire lives, like I know not to eat sugar, I'm not eating processed foods, I'm not eating pizza and stuff like that, and you're just like shifting the ratios, maybe try to eat a little bit more fat, take away some of that protein, they slip pretty easily in without dealing with any of that, really without any guidance. So it just depends upon the person. This one's interesting though, because when you increase ketone production, you're going to increase ketone excretion and it makes you pee more. So people often report that, like I'm going to the bathroom all the time, I don't understand. It will happen, it's unavoidable, but with that, if you're not replenishing that hydration, you very quickly become dehydrated, so that's worth mentioning. And that ties into the next thing you'll experience. It's a pathway here. If you're dehydrated and you're peeing out a lot of the minerals or the electrolytes, you will get muscle cramps, and due to the dehydration, you could get constipation and stuff. That's why fiber is still important.
So I'm kind of in that phase. That
Yeah.
means that next is gonna get to nausea and
Yeah. This is caused for a couple reasons though. One is not enough stomach acid, which a lot of people deal with. Everyone's on proton pump inhibitors and Tums and everything like that. So stomach acid is good for us and it needs to be there to digest your food. So if it's there, going back to the bile, that's kind of the next step for the fats. Some people just don't function as well. So you have to kind of bring that back online. Probably making sure all of these things work properly in a person before just saying, here, eat this food instead, might be beneficial. But yeah, those two specifically with digestion issues and those types of feelings. Another one we're going to talk about in a second with digestive issues is a shift in the microbiome that can happen. So we'll come back to that.
You need to move, you need to exercise. And when you exercise, you increase your air intake. So most of this, they go away.
Breathing techniques, sure. Yeah, exercise is important, absolutely.
Exercising.
Yeah. Walking, running, yeah. Moving is really the best form of exercise if you're not training for a specific thing. 10,000 steps is kind of the gold standard. So they find that 1 hour in the gym, no matter how hard you work out, what about the other 23 hours? So people who work out really hard and then go home and they watch TV all night long, it doesn't really add up. And the ironic thing is, even if you are mobile or you have a really active job, like I'm on my feet all the time, you can get a little step counter or something like that. I walk around all day long, and I got home and I was only at 3,000 steps, and I literally never sit down. So I'm nowhere near 10,000. So you don't just get to 10,000 steps by accident. There are those silly tips where, like, don't park right in front of the store, park far away, so you have to walk in, take the steps instead of the escalator. All of that adds up. It's that accumulative 10,000 steps throughout the day. So beneficial for overall health. But yeah, it would help that certainly. But take a walk with your dog, walk after dinner, just walk, move basically.
Get a dog,
Yeah, get a dog, sure. You could try to walk a cat. I heard that makes them angry. And I'm sure you've seen sitting is the new smoking.
So they will pull more, you are burning more.
You're probably pulling them because they're sitting on the ground not wanting to move, but yeah. And the last one is kind of a detox reaction. As those cells kick back online and you start dumping the toxins, you could get skin rashes and headaches and dizziness and stuff like that. This is the main, or kind of the first mistake, is people treat the ketogenic diet like a diet and they try to crash course it by not eating enough. So you don't eat enough calories, you get angry and stuff like that. It's just not the right way to approach any kind of diet or nutrition. You don't want to crash course anything. It's just not the right way to go. Now, if you're doing fasting and different things like that, just like the keto diet, you build up to that. If you have someone just eating the standard American diet and you say, don't eat for 5 days, do a water fast, that almost no one's going to be able to get through that smoothly. So building up to those things, very good benefits, but the mistake is crash coursing that. It's just not the right way to go. So those over restriction of calories, it puts stress on the system when you starve yourself on purpose. The other way is possible too. You can go and you can eat way more calories than you need. So if you needed 2,000 calories, even if it's all healthy and you're eating those right macronutrients, if you're at 2,700 calories day in and day out, you will eventually put on weight. It's unavoidable. Little off topic, but there's something called the set point theory where if I need 2,000 calories and one night I go crazy and I'm at 3,000, I do not wake up the next day with the added 5 pounds. My body somehow gets rid of all that extra stuff because your body wants to maintain where it is now. It's just as easy to put on weight as it is to lose weight, but from a human perspective, it's way more easier to eat too much than it is to eat properly and eat too little. So you have to shift that set point up or down. So sure, if I need 2,000 and I have 2,200, it's not an exact science. I don't need to pinpoint that. You want to fluctuate around the goal you're looking for. You just don't want to go crazy for too long and stay elevated, overall. And so this is why it's easy to eat a lot of calories. Fat, there's no way around it, has more calories in it than carbs and protein. And that's just basic chemistry. There's 9 calories per gram versus 4 when you're talking about proteins and fats. So even though we are filling up the calories with the fat, like we were talking about earlier, the bulk of the food is going to be vegetables, just not the bulk of the calories. And then you put on like 1 avocado on top of those vegetables, and that might be more calories than all those vegetables that are in the plate to begin with. So there's a little bit about that as well. Eating too many carbs stops the body from burning fat. It's that whole insulin thing. If insulin is spiked, it will not burn fat. And that's really the ultimate goal. So we start people at 50, but if we can get them down to 20 or 25, that would be ideal for going into ketosis there. First 2 weeks are critical. That's when you kind of ease into the whole thing. And once you are able to get into ketosis, however long it takes you, you can kind of consider yourself like over that first hump. And then it's all about that metabolic flexibility. Whether you're able to slide in and out of ketosis, it works much better the second, third, fourth, fifth time you fall out of ketosis. You're able to go right back in much quicker than that very first time. And then that is why after about a month or so of actually achieving those levels, that's when you start to work in cycling plans. There's a bunch of them. And it really does depend upon who you ask. I've seen all sorts of different theories on this. For women, a lot of people say the easiest way is to match up the cycle off with the period, just because of the increased need for different hormones and stuff like that. So there's a timeline. The men, I mean, I've seen people say like it doesn't matter. You could do it every other week. You could do it 1 week out of the month. So it does depend upon who you're talking to. But I am more against like, I'm going to take off this whole week. Like it's hard for people to stay on track when you're going long periods of time. So I would much rather fall out of the ketogenic ketosis really for like 1 day and then go back, or even 1 meal really, which would kick you out for the day. Not saying like wake up and go nuts for the entire day, but 1 day and then you're right back into being consistent with the rest of it. And you'll
had a pizza or a pasta.
Or sweet potatoes and blueberries. Yes. So you could cycle out just because like, hey, I'm out, this food's on the table, I'm gonna cheat a little bit on my diet. I don't really like using that term, but yes, you are falling out of ketosis, you know it, that's your meal for the week theoretically, and then you can go right back into it. But when you cycle out on purpose, not like I'm out, whoops, I messed up, that is the time to bring back in all of those healthy forms that might just be a little bit too high in sugar. Yeah, like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, all organic, of course. All of those more starchy, you were talking about like, the sweet potatoes and the root vegetables and stuff like that. This is where that works really nicely, where you can have these things, especially for dinner, and it is beneficial to cycle out of ketosis and back on. And they actually find the more you kind of train your body to weave in and out, the more benefits you see. Yeah. Fat. And we were talking about earlier, it's difficult to eat enough fat to be on the ketogenic diet. So the mistake is you just don't eat enough fat. You're decreasing carbs, the protein's at a good level. You are eating fat throughout the day. but sometimes it's just not enough. So finding ways to get that into that. Not only do you cook with the fats, we've already talked about that, how it's coated on there, eating avocados, nuts and seeds, stuff like that. But you mentioned you can make snacks that are out of fats as well, whether you want to call them energy bites or fat bombs, but they're basically like a snack or a dessert replacement that's made entirely out of fat. And it's a way to consume a lot of healthy fats that taste however you want it to taste really, but it tastes really good. And you can look up recipes online. They're very, very good. Do you do any of that?
No,
Okay.
because I don't know what to do.
Okay.
But it really tastes good. It's only fat. You don't put any sugar there.
Yeah, no sugar. Yeah. So I mean, if you wanted to, you could do like a mixture of coconut oil and raw cacao powder, which has no sugar in it, but it's chocolate now. It's chocolate fat. Yeah.
How much is a teaspoon?
Of.
That
Yeah.
coconut?
Yeah, you can make, I mean, usually you make a batch like you were making brownies, and then you can pour it into whatever you want. I've seen people use muffin pans. Usually the baby muffin pans are better, so you're not eating something like that large. I actually bought off of Amazon little Reese's peanut butter cup molds. So I pour them into the molds and they freeze them and they pop out. Now they're little candies about that big. And that works really well. And then eat them. Yeah. But yeah.
What about dark chocolate?
Yeah.
Without
Dark chocolate.
coconut sugar.
80%.
You mean to include into that fat bomb?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
fat addition.
Yeah, I mean, we get the ones made out of Lily's, stevia, so that is even lower in sugar, but that would be expensive if you started like melting that down to use, just because it is pricey. I'd rather just eat that.
Kinda eat it.
Oh yeah, just eat it. But if you were making it, I'll pull it up at the end here. There's a recipe online on my website and on multiple websites. You don't have to use my recipe, but yeah, you basically melt it all down, form it. You could do non-melting recipes where you're doing like no bake bars, where it's more of like a kneading into a dough, and you just kind of roll it into a little ball and put it on the cookie sheet, and it just hardens. Lots of ways to do it, but yeah, they do taste good. They're not just solid fat. But we'll come back to that, I promise. It's a way to get more fat into the system easily. Yeah, so fat intake's too low.
Ice cream?
No.
Yes.
Ice cream's out.
No. No, it's all sugar.
I mean, are you?
Not sugar is whatever he said. It's, I don't know, the replacement stevia.
I mean, are you making your own ice cream?
It's heavy cream.
You're making it though.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can make your own. Yeah, I make my own all the time. Yeah. Yeah, you can. You need a blender if you're going to do it really well. You need a blender with a fan. So if you do it with like a little NutriBullet, you'll burn out that motor really quickly because you got to leave it run. So something like a Vitamix, or they made a new NutriBullet where the fan is on there, like NutriBullet RX or something like that. But yeah, you put in ice, heavy whipping cream, coconut oil. You can make it really, really nice. You blend it, and it just kind of churns into a very frozen little dessert there. Eat it quickly because it melts. You can freeze it, and then it takes like 4 hours to defrost. So I mean, yeah, but it is. You can make your own ice cream. Yeah.
I did that with an ice cube tray. I put heavy whipping cream,
Yeah.
burns the heavy whipping cream. Then I put it in, I put some water in,
Sure.
or flax milk or something.
Okay.
And then I would put it's greens first, powdered greens, but chocolate flavor.
Yep.
Put that in
Yeah.
there, and
Yeah.
it's sweet.
We do that a lot. Yeah, we have a chocolate greens mix as well. So we do that. So it's chocolate flavored, dark chocolate flavored, but it has all those vitamins and nutrients because it's basically just powdered vegetables. And then you fill in around that, whether you're putting in bone broth powder, collagen powder, however you want to make it. Some people use like dehydrated peanut butter, like PB Fit, something like that. You could do almond flour. There's almond butter, macadamia nut butter. So there's ways to make it taste really however you want to. It's creativity.
Now I thought peanuts were not good because
They're not great, no.
with the mold or whatever.
Yeah. The mycotoxins coming off of peanuts.
So I'm
Yeah.
like, not-
Yeah, I mean, we could nitpick almost everything. I mean, but we're talking about making ice cream at this point. So yeah. So yeah, don't have ice cream. But yeah, not to endorse them, but Halo Top is really good. Enlightened is another brand where if you kind of want to cheat a little bit, but it's not quite. They're expensive, but they are delicious.
So Halo is actually keto?
It's borderline. It's better than ice cream, put it that way. But yeah, they taste good. Halo Top, Enlightened is another good brand. There's another one called Arctic Freeze. I don't like them. I'm sorry. But yeah, they don't taste great.
So they have no sugar in them?
They have very, very low amounts of sugar, very high amounts of fiber, protein, And if you read the ingredients, there's nothing glaringly wrong with it. There's no artificial sweeteners or anything like that. So they are made quite well. Yeah. Would you want to eat like a whole quart every single night? No, not really. But you can eat, actually, the whole quart is like, I think like 380 calories depending upon the serving size, where a whole quart of like Ben & Jerry's one serving is 380 calories, and it's like 1,000 for the whole quart. It's crazy the difference, but they are delicious if you don't want to make your own.
Also, I have a question regarding the sweet replacement or the sweet whatever, trying to cheat the sugar. I've read that doesn't matter what kind of sweet, let's say we use stevia, it doesn't matter what, the body still treats it as a sugar. So even if it's not sugar, you don't get the spike, it's still acting like it's a sugar, and you are training back to the sugar part. So it's like hard to go back to no sugar.
Right. Do you get an insulin spike from it though?
No.
Right, so
I
that's the
look at
goal.
this,
Yeah.
I look at that device. And
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of the theory behind diet soda. You don't get an insulin spike from aspartame either, but your body signals the fact that you ate something, you didn't get any calories, and you end up hungrier than you were in the beginning. So people who drink diet soda put on weight actually, even though they weren't drinking any calories. So could you argue the technicality that stevia does the same thing? Maybe. I don't think so.
that's what I think it does.
Yeah, maybe.
There is no spike in the measuring device.
There's not.
But the body still acts like there is.
Yeah, I mean, and you can argue that you're trying to train the tongue, like tongues get trained to like sweetness. We should be eating more bitter foods technically. So yeah, if you keep bombarding it, like I need to drink my coffee with a whole packet of stevia in it, it's not great, but you're not spiking blood glucose. Yeah, you should. No, I mean,
So
yeah,
here's what I understand
Yeah.
about stevia.
Yeah.
People who eat a lot of sugar hate stevia
yeah,
because stevia has a bitter aftertone, and that's what they'll tell you. I don't like the aftertaste. If you keep them taking stevia, small amounts of course, they will start to hate sugar.
yeah. Yeah, you
So
kind of
stevia is
transition them
the-
half packet sugar, half packet of stevia, and you go back and
Stevia,
forth.
Cinnamon, a few
Yeah.
of those are used to get people off sugar.
Yeah,
Like
and
Dunkel,
the
Better
aftertaste does switch from brand to brand. So some brands do taste better,
Yes.
and that's simply because the sweet receptors fire first on the tongue, and you get that secondary firing of the bitterness. But like stevia in the raw, again, I'm not endorsing any of these companies, but I find that does not taste gross at all. Where other ones I've tried, and it's very like instant plant taste, where I could understand why someone would say, "Why would you tell me that tastes like sugar?" It just doesn't. Yeah. To each their own.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You had dark chocolate on your list as something good to eat, but how
Yeah.
do you get that? I mean, to eat a dark chocolate bar,
80,
there's a lot of
80%.
sugar in it.
Yeah. So the bars, the percent of cacao that you see, not cocoa, but cacao, whatever that percent is, the rest of that percent is sugar. So 70%, then 30% is the sugar there. So the higher that percentage, the better it's going to be.
Cocoa
70,
or
80.
cacao?
Cacao is the dark chocolate. Cocoa is chocolate and sugar. Yeah. But yes, if you go to like Acme, you're going to find mostly like 60 to 70%. You can find bars that are much higher though. Yeah.
Over 70, you are safe.
Yeah.
If it's 80 or 90.
I was going to say,
go
I've
for it.
seen 90 before. Now you have to really like,
Better than 70.
92 is out there now.
yeah. And you have to really like dark chocolate. Like if
Yeah.
someone loves Reese's, they are not going to like the taste. It's very bitter. I don't eat a lot of chocolate. I've never been a big chocolate guy, but yeah, people who love chocolate, that does work very well. But when you're using chocolate in things, you can actually get just powdered cacao.
Yeah.
And it's 100%.
How about cocoa nibs?
Yeah, cacao nibs work very well. Now again, if you eat that, it does not taste like a chocolate chip. It's gross. But in things, it's delicious. You can cook in the, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Oatmeal's not allowed. Yeah.
I put in my coffee, come on.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so there's different ways to do that. But yeah, so protein, again, just raising awareness that protein is often overdone by people, and if you're decreasing the carbs and you're increasing the protein, then you're gonna get the same sugar response. So you have to kind of balance out that protein, just not having it in excess. Going back to that liver process of gluconeogenesis, which is not what we want. And again, we do start people at about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. It's just a good baseline. And then going back to the reading, after people have been following this pretty strictly for a while, if you get a reading and you're still not in ketosis, that would probably be the one thing that to look at. Maybe you bump that down. You don't need that much overall. I've heard people say that the max we would ever need throughout a day is 70 grams. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard it. So if you weigh a lot more, they still say don't just divide it by 2.2 and get 1 gram. They say just stop at 70. You don't need any more than that. I don't know if that's true or not. Food quality is a big one. It's what I harp on almost all the time because you can do pretty much any diet correctly and still just absolutely fail in the quality of the foods that you're eating. It's just amused me. You could do a paleo diet with like hot dogs, bacon, and string cheese, basically. Deli meat's a big one. I see people eating. It drives me nuts. But and you can do a ketogenic diet using a lot of those crappy vegetable oils and canola oil and stuff like that, and then farm-raised fish, and apparently wild-caught fish that are running away. Yeah, but yeah. So there are right and wrong ways to do it. So are you technically on a ketogenic diet? Sure, but going back to that nutrient and calorie ratio, you're not getting a lot of nutrients from some of these poor quality foods that you want to eat. So ignoring food quality is terrible no matter which way you're eating. Doesn't matter if it's keto or not. You just want to harp on quality a little bit more. And that actually goes back to protein a lot too. It's great that they're eating protein, but if you can start to get people to switch and find grass-fed meat, it's some of the biggest changes in nutrition that you can get people looking into, because everyone can say don't eat sugar. That's not hard to suggest to someone, but when you start sitting down and nitpicking the quality, I find that people are actually fascinated by it, and they can say like, I didn't know that. I didn't know it mattered. Yes, don't eat McDonald's cheeseburger, eat better quality beef, but they know that's bad, but they don't really know the intricacies of what that cow was eating, what that chicken was eating, etc. So I like to talk about that sort of stuff. And you find out new stuff all the time, like that little, tip there. Yeah. Who knew? Because they are always trying to trick us, and there's different ways and marketing ploys and stuff like that. So quality food is getting harder and harder to find. At the same time, it's also getting easier to find. It's like a weird balance. They're trying to keep up with us. I don't know. But hydration is also very important. This is pretty much standard in nutrition, but we should be trying to consume at least 1/2 our body weight in ounces per day minimum. For a heavier person, that seems crazy, but you can do it. Sort of like the fiber we were talking about earlier. If you just jump right into that, you're going to go to the bathroom all the time. As you do it over and over and over again, your cells are going to be much better at taking in that water. So you're actually going to use and kind of internally rehydrate rather than having all that water just kind of pass through you and go right out the other side. Seems counterintuitive, but some people who pee all the time or they have bloating issues and stuff like that, they try to stay away from water because they think it's going to make it worse when it's actually doing the exact opposite effect. You want to provide the body with the water so it's not afraid to let the rest go. And then also...
There's about a 2-week cutover on that.
Yeah.
You're severely dehydrated.
Yeah. Same thing with fat loss as well. And this was a new term to me. I knew it existed, but I've never heard of the fat swoosh before. Has anyone ever heard of that? Apparently because you can never get rid of fat cells. Everyone knows that, right? They grow larger and larger and larger, and when they get to a point where they're too large, they kind of split into 2, and now you have 2, and even you can shrink and expand those, you can never go back to 1. So that's why a lot of people who are very, very overweight will never look like an Instagram model because they just can't cut all of that without surgery and stuff like that. But the fat swoosh, which was fascinating, is as you lose the fat out of this adipose tissue, out of this fat cell, the body almost like it holds its place. It says, yeah, you lost that fat, but I know you're going to put it right back on. I'm just going to maintain this spot for you. So it actually fills it up immediately with water. So there's kind of like a delayed effect. And if you put that fat back on, it stores it very quickly because that water is just displaced and the fat goes right back to where it started from. It's very easy for the body. Again, we're lazy and efficient at the same time. Rather than getting rid of all that, putting it back in, that's annoying for the body. So if you maintain consistency, water, more fat, more water, more fat loss, and as this fills all the way up, eventually the body says, I guess the fat's not actually coming back, and that's what that whoosh theory is, or metaphor.
So
but
I will wake up in a week and I'm gonna be skinny.
yeah, it's very typical for people to say like, I'm so consistent with my diet, I don't understand, and they keep going and they keep going, and all of a sudden they say they see benefits. And the same way in the other direction, like you're consistent, you mess up, you're not 100 pounds heavier the very next day. Like your body self-regulates almost. But that consistency, I've actually seen people do really well. They mess up, and the next day happened to be when they had that swoosh, and they're like, I lost 3 pounds last night, and like they didn't eat very well. it was just the timing of everything. So there's a delayed effect. I don't know if anyone's figured out how long that actually takes, but for most people, it's longer than a week. So if people are being discouraged with any kind of dietary modifications within the same week, I mean, one, no diet should last a week. It's a lifestyle change. It's nutrition. It's your whole life. So maintaining this forever, it's that consistency factor that keeps coming up with almost everything. But that was way off topic. So back to nutrition, back to water. So common complaints are all those headaches and everything like that. A lot of that's caused the dehydration. Again, we do pee more because of that increased ketone excretion. So we just need to drink more and more water. If you drink too much with meals, you can dilute your stomach acid a little bit, so it's not great to chug a whole bunch of water while you're actively eating. You want that acid maintained in your stomach. So you can have some water, but you mostly want to drink the bulk of your water in between meals. And the easiest way to do that is just get in the habit of increasing that water intake as soon as you wake up first thing in the morning, because you're not doing anything else. You just kind of stand there and you make yourself drink it before you let yourself do anything else. Don't have coffee or any other form. And a lot of people actually find that when they start doing this, because you literally just went all night long not drinking, you wake up and you're dehydrated. And by reflooding your system with that hydration, it actually wakes you up and kicks you back online better than that coffee and that caffeine ever would. It's very, very cool. And once you're used to it,
And that doesn't
it's
count
not
as
that
a
hard.
meal. That's the only thing.
The water, no, the water does not. Yes. Yeah, and it's great.
Yes, Bridget,
What
doesn't
about-
count. The water doesn't count.
Yeah, the water. Yeah, water fast. You can drink water.
Count as a meal
Yeah.
to your body.
Yeah.
It processes that differently.
Right. Absolutely.
So what about if it's lemon water?
There's
That
arguments
food.
2 and 4. Yeah. We were talking about this a little earlier, and this is more into the fasting talk that Dr. Connor gave.
Yeah.
But there are lists of what does and does not kick you out of fasting. And in my opinion, the items on that list have more to do with how strict you're trying to be with that fast. So if you're just trying to get a couple of the benefits from the fasting, whether it's weight loss or autophagy and things like that, there are certain things you can do that might technically kick you out of that fast, but it doesn't elicit that insulin spike, so it's fine.
Okay.
It's not technically still fasted, but you didn't spike insulin, so you still get a lot of those benefits. But if you were just going to be super militant about it, water is the only thing you're allowed to have. But other things, like you can put lemon in your water. There are different types of fast too. You could do bone broth fast. You could do coffee fast. Is it technically fasted? No, but all of those things count as different forms of fasting because you are not eating food. You're just consuming other stuff. But you're right. It counts as a meal to the processes of the body.
To that cycle of
Yeah, and it just depends on what you're trying to, or sure, if you're doing the circadian rhythm, but yeah, it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you have cancer and you're fasting for that reason, then just have water, like why mess around with it? But if you're just trying to feel better, lose weight, get some of these little minor benefits, and you like coffee, then sure, have coffee. Yeah, it's fun. So minerals are important because whether you're dehydrated or not, almost everybody is deficient in the minerals. You can blame this a lot on farming techniques and no crop rotation and stuff like that. The vegetables that we eat, organic helps, but it's still not perfect. We are lacking a lot of the trace minerals in the soil these days. So getting in more vegetables is great overall, but we still are deficient in a lot of minerals. So with that increased hydration, we do want to make sure we're providing the body with not just the macro minerals that you get through a lot of the food, but the smaller trace minerals as well. And if you don't do that, things break down enzyme systems.
Supplement.
You could, yes. Liquid supplements are what I find the easiest. It's a little dropper bottle. You put it right in a smoothie or water or something like that. Don't ask me if that breaks the fast. I don't know, probably technically. But yes, increase. And we talk about it a lot in the dental industry as well because minerals become so important for the teeth and trace minerals are lacking in a lot of the foods that we eat. So supplemental forms are very good, but other forms as well. So I'll say that in a second. That gets back to the body excreting more urine. So the best sources, if you're going to eat them, vegetables are very high in it, but I said there's issues with that due to the farming techniques, but that is kind of the foundation. You don't want to just ignore vegetables. Pink salt is interesting because a lot of people ask about that. It's pretty much any salt with color because as soon as you consume salt that is white, you're not really eating salt anymore. You're just eating sodium because they took away all the minerals. So a lot of the demonization of salt is due to the fact that you're just consuming unopposed sodium, not really the salt in and of itself. And then when you strip all those minerals away, you bleach that salt and it becomes white again. Then it clumps. So you got to add in other factors that anti-clump it, if that's a right word. But a lot of it is like titanium dioxide and sugar and stuff like that. So a lot of this they are actually to blame for a lot of the salt issues too. But pink salt, black salt, gray salt, there's a lot of cool ones depending upon where it's coming from, but it is very good.
Like the
Celtic salt, yes. Bone broth and supplements. This is just a list of very high mineral rich foods. It's, they're all delicious. They're all good to cycle in, and they're all very applicable to this type of eating to get those in there. Fiber is very important, comes with the vegetables, but if you don't do keto correctly, like we're just eating proteins and fats and we try to ignore the vegetables, this is pretty interesting, but you will actually get a shift in your microbiome overall because you kind of have deprived them of the foods that they eat, these prebiotics. Yeah, they start to starve off, and you will be left with some, of course, but you don't want to be left with some. You want about 40,000 different strains. There's a wide diversity in your microbiome. If you starve them through an improperly formed ketogenic diet, basically lack of fiber and vegetables, you will end up with that, and then you have GI issues from there. Also can throw off blood sugar regulation. So vegetables, hydration, magnesium, but fiber, these three I find really easily to supplement with, smoothies, things like that. Organic psyllium husk, inulin's a big one. And
What is inulin? I mean, I know it's a supplement, but where
Yeah.
does it come from?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Not specifically. Yeah, it's a type of fiber. Like I don't even technically know what psyllium husk is. It's a
Oh, I know what that is.
fibrous
That comes
grain.
from
Yeah,
plantain.
right. Okay, plantain. There you go. But yes, they are all very good fiber forms. And oligosaccharides have shown to be beneficial to specific types of bacteria, which is even more interesting.
That feeds the good guys.
Yes, exactly, and not the bad guys.
The husk is the component that if you want to do a keto bread, you are adding the husk, the psyllium husk.
Yeah,
And it's
you can
like,
use that as bulk for a lot of things.
It's like glue to the
Yeah.
flour, to almond, or to
Yeah.
coconut.
Real
flour.
cheap on Amazon, organic. It's good to get it that way, yeah. Last slide, putting it all together. This is kind of the steps we would go through with someone to kind of guide them into ketosis, how we're not ripping off a Band-Aid, but we're kind of sliding through. Rule number one with almost everyone is we just see if they're drinking water. A lot of people go throughout their entire lives and they're drinking, but it's never water. Soda, sports drinks, other stuff like that. So yeah, water and water-based drinks. Like if you want to make your own lemonade and iced tea, that's basically just water with stuff added to it. But yes, water intake is very, very important. Filtered water, you also don't want to drink adulterated water. I find Carbon Block to be one of the best ones to go with. It's one of the most economical. If you want to install like a whole house reverse osmosis system, that's great. But some people, depending upon where they live, they actually don't even need that added protection from that membrane of the reverse osmosis, and Carbon Block works just as well because all RO systems will eventually run through a Carbon Block. It's part of it. I use Berkey, if anyone cares. It works well.
What do you use?
Berkey, Berkey. It's a filter. It's a Carbon Block filter. You don't want.
Where do you use it, at the sink or at the house?
It's an on-the-counter filtration system.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I actually.
Like that, like on the counter?
Yeah, you pour the water in the top, it runs through a Carbon Block, it comes out the bottom, you drink it. And I ironically got that because when we built our house, no one wanted to drill into my countertops, no one wanted the responsibility of breaking the granite, so no one would install any kind of faucet for us. So I got that because you don't need it. And it turns out it's excellent. I mean, water tastes great, it's easy, you just pour it in as you need it, filters through that. There's other ones, but you don't want carbon powder, you want Carbon Block. Carbon powder, as the water runs through it, it'll eventually create a little channel, path of least resistance kind of, and after they get old, the water just flies right through it. Yeah. So block. And then add back the liquid minerals, especially if you have an RO system, because it's great. It removes almost everything, but it removes the minerals as well. Restrict carbohydrates, so that's the next thing. Again, going back to what all diet plans or nutrition theories go with, so we're trying to work on lowering that as much as possible. And then because we're kind of shunting into ketosis, we're just talking about healthier forms of fat, because a lot of the people that we talk to are still afraid of fat. They're still stuck in that fat is bad, fat makes you fat.
Terrified.
Yeah.
I wanted to put more and I just put a drop. I couldn't put more.
Yeah, saturated fat is terrible. It raises cholesterol. I mean, there's all these things that have been ingrained into us forever. And almost all of it is actually just a flat lie, not even just like a misleading a little bit. It's just made up. Yeah, I mean, the whole cholesterol, never mind.
That's a whole nother.
Yeah. Yeah.
A good talk.
Yeah. So you know, restrict carbohydrates and then don't be afraid of fats. We're increasing that as much as possible, especially cooking with good fats, getting away from Pam and other spraying oils and stuff like that. It's what you want to go for. And then that's the last part, is just dialing that in. If you can't quite get into ketosis, a lot of the time it's just because we're eating too much protein. So you want to kind of dial that back and restrict it. When you get those three categories kind of solid and you're used to eating all of that food, then you're really just going and you're kind of leading into the whole fasting concept, where you should not be eating 6, 7, 8 meals throughout the day. Your digestive system needs a chance to relax. So you start by cutting out these smaller meals in between. They used to preach all the time about how you want to sustain energy through the body and eat every couple hours. And that might be true for glucose utilization, because you do need smaller meals, low glucose, so you don't get that spike over and over again. But if you're using fat for fuel, you don't need that constant intake of food. So we're letting everything rest, especially at night. Don't eat at midnight.
Well, it's interesting that they talked us into many, many meals,
Yeah.
and they were talking us out of fat.
Yeah, yeah. There's a nice little parallel there, right? Yeah. And it goes back to, like, they're probably not wrong. They're probably doing it on purpose. They're probably way smarter than we give them credit for all these marketing
They make
ads.
more money on the carbs.
Yeah.
Almost direction.
Yeah, breakfast is the most important meal of the day because the dairy industry told you that, because the cereal industry told them that. I mean, it was just crazy.
Start with that and you'll be hungry all day.
Right, yeah, exactly.
For everybody.
And
Right.
sugar crush at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
How much fat
Golden
do
grams
you
are
put in a
delicious.
salad in a plate?
What's that?
Let's say a dinner. How much fat, how much oil would you put
On a
in a
salad.
salad at dinner, like in this cup?
Yeah.
So much, so much, so much.
So if you're having a salad, yeah, tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, something like that.
That's it?
On a salad, I mean, I guess it depends on how big that salad is. Yeah. If like here's a meal. If I was going to cook a meal in a pan,
For that whole day, okay, we don't separate the breakfast, lunch and that. The whole fat during the day, how much should be? Like, I need to visualize. Comparing to this cup, half of cup, quarter of a cup, little bit on the bottom.
Yeah, okay. So for that question, I have never consumed oil and then poured the equivalent amount in a cup. I have no idea how to answer that, but if you want me to, I will do that tomorrow.
Okay.
I will eat fat throughout the day and I'll pour the equivalent into a cup and I'll send you a picture.
Yeah.
It's going to look really weird at the end of that day, but yeah. So for dinner though, I would get that frying pan. I would cook all of my vegetables, pick broccoli and cauliflower in probably like a chunk of coconut oil, probably like that, like a big tablespoon. Yeah, that'll all melt. That gets coated in all that. I cover it with a lid so it's kind of sauteed
That
from
would
there.
be one of the fats at
That's
lunch.
one of that dinner, yeah. If we are having a salad, I almost always chop up a half an avocado. If I have that, give half to my wife. I eat the other half. That's good to include there. The fat content of whatever meat we may be having, that all counts. So whether it's wild caught fish, whether it's grass-fed beef, all of that fat content, that counts directly to it. I mean,
Even lean chicken has like 20% fat in it.
yeah,
People don't know that.
yeah,
And if
exactly.
you put nuts in your salad like I
Right.
do, that's fat.
Yeah, you don't want to eat a bowl of spinach. You'll get really bored with food pretty quickly. You got to be creative with how you're doing these things.
For the chicken, you have to eat legs, and you don't like legs because they are more fatty, not breast.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
You are in trouble, Bridget.
Yeah. So after we get people used to not snacking and then going all night long without eating, they're much more willing to try just delaying that breakfast time then. And again, delaying it just 1 hour, you start to get a lot of these benefits. You delay it by 2, 3, 4, and you just kind of keep going. And for most people, if they can get to that 16-8 split, that's pretty darn good. And really that's like a normal dinner all the way around to like 12 or 1, something like that for most people. Skipping breakfast is probably the easier way to do it because skipping dinner is socially hard, just because everyone wants to eat dinner together. If you look at Dr. Connor's talk about the circadian rhythm, they tell you to do it the other way around where you're eating breakfast and skipping dinner. That might be true in that theory, but it's hard to do that. Like if you go out to dinner or you're meeting up with your family, like if you say like I can't eat dinner, they're going to think you're weird.
That probably works in Europe,
Yeah,
where lunch is actually the
biggest meal of the day, right? Absolutely,
Dinner is
and
10
everyone,
o'clock.
yeah, and that works quite well.
What Europe? Which Europe are you talking about?
Yeah.
We are eating at 9 p.m. dinner.
If you go to Spain, you sleep during the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Do they still do that? Yeah, they did when I was in 3rd grade when I was over there. Then start fasting. After that, goes right back to everything you were talking about, add movement. You can't just eat well and think you're going to be perfectly healthy. Exercise still does play a large role into that. Resistance training is great for muscle building and increasing skeletal muscle mass, but movement is so key overall. And then there's supplemental support. I mean, there's so many different supplements to get into. These are just a couple that kind of directly relate to ketosis just because of the fat shunting and the increased stability of the healthy fats like the vitamin E, CoQ10, stuff like that. But that kind of wraps everything up all together. There's a couple more slides that get into athletics and stuff like that because there's a lot of misconception with losing muscle mass and different things like that with fasting because you're not eating. A lot of that's not true, but that'll go on for a while. So we're just going to end it here. Is there any questions?
So you can stay in ketosis for years and years?
No, you wouldn't want to stay in ketosis for years. You would want to have the ability to get into ketosis. You want to have that metabolic flexibility. And once you're there and you're able to do that quite easily, like not eating carbs is not a chore to people. Like it just becomes your way of life. That's when you want to start getting into that cycling plan. And I mean, there's so many ways to approach cycling and different times of the week, but figuring out a way that works for you, not just systemically, but just with your way of life so you can actually apply it and maintain it. Yes, you do not want to be 100% strict all the time, but that doesn't mean like go crazy on cereal either. Like you do theoretically want to be 100% strict with that sort of stuff. So when I talk about cycling back in, we're talking about little servings of healthy starchy vegetables, fruits and things like that. Yeah. And that's good too, because a lot of those vegetables are very beneficial for health and they're delicious. Like who doesn't love mashed sweet potatoes or something like that, sweet potato fries if you make your own. So there are ways to incorporate a lot of those good foods. You get all those great benefits and you're not deprived of that sort of thing. Okay. Yeah.
I've been doing this for about 2 years.
Yep.
And I never wanted to lose any weight.
Okay.
I ended up losing like 12 pounds.
Okay.
But if I don't, like I make a keto coffee.
Sure.
But I put like a heaping tablespoon of coconut oil. I put tablespoon of Kerrygold butter. Like probably I it. I shouldn't do that
Right.
now. Of the MCT oil, I just like
Right.
I think that's a tablespoon.
Right.
But if I don't, and I make 2 of these.
Yeah.
One for like the afternoon and one in the morning.
Yep.
And then I make my shake too.
Yeah.
And that carries me through the day. I'm not hungry and I don't eat supper.
Yep.
But if I don't eat that much fat,
Mhm.
I lose weight. Like
Yeah.
I have to eat like.
Right.
My job is I'm a welder fabricator, so I'm
Yeah.
like carrying steel and
Right.
it's very. But if I don't eat it, I'll just like.
So a lot of those little nitpicky things I was going through, it's mostly for people who are overweight, trying to lose weight, just assuming they can eat as much as they want. I mean, in theory, as you get into ketosis and you end up looking like you do, where you're not carrying a lot of excess body weight, if you do it correctly, you should not continue just to blow through weight. Like your body will stabilize. And then, yeah, you can be a little bit more liberal with those fats that add up because you are not carrying around a whole bunch of excess weight. You're probably in ketosis most of the time if you've been doing this for a really long time, so you're very efficient at churning up that fat for fuel.
But also it's more of an endurance fuel, so it's probably helping him get through a hard work during the day.
Absolutely. And that goes back to when people used to blame like genetics and metabolism and why some people can just, stay skinny their entire lives. Like, does that happen a little bit? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but a lot of it is just, if you look at the root of it, it's just a balance of everything creating this perfect storm. You have a very active lifestyle versus someone who has a desk job. Like, some people might look at you and say, you're lucky, you're just always naturally skinny, and not taking any of that into account.
I ride dirt bike too.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I've never done that, but I'm sure it's hard. So yeah, all of this plays into it. So if you are already not carrying a lot of excess body weight, you don't have to be as nitpicky with the fat inclusion. You still would want to be a little bit nitpicky with the sugar and the proteins overall. But if you're trying to get into ketosis, just go nuts. Yeah. Now, if you wake up after like 3 weeks of consuming 5,000 calories, you're probably going to put on some weight, but you should then not put on or not consume 5,000 calories, and you should just go right back to where you started. This
Can I
is,
say another thing
yeah.
about that I really like about this?
yeah,
Because it's 2 years, and I really haven't had a cold.
yeah,
Like I used to get at least one bad sinus infection.
Yeah.
Where it would like drag for
Immu-
5 weeks.
immune system improvement is
But
huge.
I just don't, and I don't get. I used to carry Tums around with me all the time.
Yeah.
I don't.
He lived on ibuprofen.
And
Yeah.
Ibuprofen all the time. And I don't. I mean,
How
I
about
take
joints?
it sometimes.
Joints feel better?
What's that?
Your joints feel better?
My joints feel better.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. I mean, I go to a chiropractor too, so I do get adjusted too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm just doing this and that's all.
Yeah, that BHB ketone has a lot of direct effects on the immune system, which is great. But also just thinking about it, like when you're not eating all that junk that's causing gut inflammation, most of your immune system lives in the gut of the gut there. So you're healing that almost by accident, just because you're improving that. And that comes with fasting too. The less stuff you're putting in it, the less you're making it work, you'll get improvements just from that as well. That's why they say to starve a cold, or starve a fever, whatever they say. Yeah. And if you were wondering about recipes, there's a ton online. We happen to have one. This is our website, but it just kind of walks you through different ways to, make these energy bites. And they come out. They're good. You can make them taste however you want.
What's up with those green eggs?
Oh yeah, this is my favorite. We started doing this for kids who don't like the texture of when you put stuff in their eggs. You literally just blend eggs and vegetables together. Now it's smooth again. You pour it in there and you say it's green eggs and ham, and they love it. So it doesn't alter the taste at all. It still tastes exactly like eggs. And if they're not weirded out about the green ones, like I've had really stubborn people that just refuse, but our daughter, she eats that once a day almost. Yeah, it's 1.5. Yeah. But yeah, it kind of walks you through. I mean, they're all on there, but yeah, NutriBullet, blend it in there, blend the spinach, pour it in, and it's green eggs and ham. It's fun without the ham. Green eggs, no ham. I think it says that at the top, actually. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
But yeah, there's a bunch of cool recipes. These are not all specifically keto, but like I love the use of cauliflower. Vegetable fritters are great. You can basically make pancakes out of almost everything. Protein pancakes are a huge one. We make pancakes all the time. You basically just swap out all the flour and use bone broth. Works really well. We love Indian food. We make that all the time as well. Pumpkin muffins, those are really good. You can make really good muffins just to have on hand. They're in a little Tupperware in your fridge, so you can eat them. Banana sushi, that's not keto at all, but it is fun to do. That's a coconut wrap, by the way. It's really cool. Different ways to make brownies with the raw cacao powder. I mean, there's a lot of good recipes up there just because people say, like, what do I eat? And so we were trying to get up some of the cooler recipes that you would see. Yeah.
Do you have a business card?
I do. Not on me. Yeah.
Can you scroll down to the name of your business?
Yeah, it's the last name. Here, I'll go to the home. It's Trovato Nutrition. And that's everything, TrovatoNutrition@gmail.com, TrovatoNutrition.com on my Instagram, Facebook, everything like that.
But you said before your practice was dental as well?
We have two.
Dental and nutrition.
Yeah, so we have a brick and mortar nutrition business because it was very weird to patients to sit them in a dental chair and talk about keto diets.
Okay.
We opened up a wellness center just for general nutrition and health and things like that. The majority of our work week, Monday through Thursday, we are at Meeting House Dental Care. It's a biologic dental office over on County Line and Meeting House Road. And that's my main job. I'm the on-staff nutritionist for the biologic dental office there.
I think
Yeah.
Meeting House dead ends right on your property.
It does, yeah. Most GPSs are weird, like they tell you to turn, but Meeting House literally runs directly into the driveway. You just keep driving. Yeah,
And you won't see the sign from Meeting House.
yeah.
It's like this.
We got a new one.
Okay.
Yeah,
good.
the township wouldn't let us point the sign in that direction, so we angled it, and we're going to see how long it takes someone to notice. Yeah, but yeah, the main sign faces County Line Road, so we put up a little smaller sign so you can see it again. But yeah, it was a little hard to find coming straight on Meeting House.
Exactly.
But it does run right into the driveway. You can't miss it. And Meeting House Dental Care sounded better than County Line Dental Care. Yeah, but that's what we do. But then we don't just talk about teeth. We talk about other stuff. People talk about teeth, and they're like, well, what about this? What about this? They only give me so much time before the doctor yanks me out of the room and he has to get working. So they would come back if they had any interest in follow-up on any kind of medications or supplements or anything like that they want to talk about. Yeah, and that's what the other building's for. And if you look that up on here, we are only open by appointment only. No one's sitting over there because we're over at the other office so much. So don't just show up there. We're not there.
Okay.
Yeah. So people will schedule. I'll have that in my phone so I know when the schedule is. So some weeks we see like 5 or 6 people. Other times there's only one. Some weeks we get no one and I get a day off. But yeah, so we're open by appointment only.
Is it your second office in top of Salon 463?
It is, yeah.
I just
Yeah.
found you.
They're under us, yeah. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're good. They're a salon. There's nothing special or organic about them. You walk in and you can just smell the chemicals. But yeah, they're there.
Hey, I won't be going there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got to hold your.
There, she likes them.
Yeah, they are very good at what they do, but it's a hair salon. We do no organic hair salons. They're very good. They're also pricey, but you get what you pay for, sort of thing. I don't get my hair done, so I don't know a lot about it.
Organic salon mean? Because I went to an organic salon, so I'm sitting in the chair waiting
Yeah.
for my hair cut. The woman next to me is getting her hair uncolored.
Uh-huh.
The chemical to take the coloring out of her hair affected me. I
Yeah.
barely made it home that night. So dizzy from that
Yeah.
getting the color taken.
Yeah, I can't give you a good answer, but I just know that like the dyes and stuff they use, they're a lot more natural than a traditional hair salon.
Unless they're taking color out.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I really do not know. I've never actually been there. My wife goes there. I cut my own hair because it's not hard.
Where is it?
I can get you that information. I don't know off the top of my head. She disappears for 4 hours and then she comes
There
back.
was
I
one
don't know.
in Percy, that's where this one was, and they're probably good, the organic part. It
Uh,
was the fact.
I think it's the one in
Is it Jade? Jade?
It's
No.
JD's in Ambler. It's the one that our client told us about it. Yeah,
That
we have
rings
to
a bell.
get there.
It
Yeah.
had to do with butterflies, the one in Percy.
Okay.
Butterflies.
Yeah, I don't know.